Clara Whitmore didn't knock. She pounded on that door with both fists like she was trying to break through something that had been shut against her for years, and maybe she was. When Nathan Cole opened it, she was standing in the dark with frost on her eyelashes and mud on her boots, and her father barely 3 days in the ground, and she looked straight at him with those red-rimmed eyes and said the words that changed both their lives forever. I need a husband by Friday. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this one is going to take everything you've got. Nathan Cole had not spoken to another human being in 11 days. He knew this because he counted. Not out of loneliness, he would never have called it that, but because silence had become the thing he trusted most, and he kept track of it, the way other men kept track of money, or weather, or the number of rounds left in a rifle. 11 days of nothing but wind off the mountain, the sound of his horses moving in the dark, and the creak of old timber settling against the cold. 11 days of exactly the life he had chosen. Then Clara Whitmore knocked on his door. It was 20 minutes past 9 on a Tuesday night in November, and the temperature had dropped hard enough to split fence posts. Nathan was sitting at his table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, and a land survey map he had been staring at without reading for the better part of an hour, when he heard it 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. Not tentative, not polite. The knock of someone who had made a decision and was past the point of second-guessing it. He sat still for a moment. Nobody climbed 5 miles up a frozen mountain trail after dark, unless something had gone badly wrong or unless they were the particular kind of stubborn that didn't register cold or darkness as obstacles. In Nathan's experience, those 2 categories of person tended to overlap considerably. He set down his coffee, picked up the lantern from the hook beside the door, and opened it. Clara Whitmore stood on his porch in an old brown wool dress that had been mended twice at the left shoulder, a coat that wasn't quite heavy enough for the night she was standing in, and boots that had seen enough Wyoming winters to be embarrassed about it. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that had started the day neat and lost the argument somewhere around mile 3 of the trail. Her cheeks were red from the cold. Her eyes were red from something else entirely. She was holding a small canvas bag in her right hand, gripping the handle so hard her knuckles had gone pale. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. He had known Samuel Whitmore's daughter since she was a girl of maybe 14, running fence line with her father on the lower pasture, always 2 steps ahead and arguing about something. He had watched her grow up from a distance, the way you watch weather move across a valley, aware of it, acknowledging it, not particularly involved. Clara Whitmore had become a woman who was talked about in town the way people talked about things they didn't understand, with the particular mixture of contempt and discomfort that passed for conversation among people who had never bothered to look closely at anything. She was 28 years old. She was also by any reasonable measure the hardest working person in the Whitmore Valley, a fact that the town managed to overlook completely in favor of other observations they found more interesting. "Nathan," she said. Her voice was steady. He gave her credit for that. "I need a husband by Friday." He stared at her. He genuinely could not determine in that first moment whether she was feverish, whether something had gone catastrophically wrong with her thinking, or whether she had simply been out in the cold long enough that the words had rearranged themselves in some way that made sense to her, but hadn't quite arrived to him intact. "I beg your pardon," he said. "You heard me." She adjusted her grip on the bag. "My father is dead. The ranch is in trouble. And the only way I keep from losing everything my family built is if I'm married before the county land auction on Friday morning." She paused. "I need a husband. I'm asking you." Nathan looked past her at the dark trail she had come up. He looked at the frost on the porch rail. He looked back at her. "Come inside," he said, "before you freeze." She came in. She stood in the middle of his cabin and looked around the way people did when they were trying to seem calm and were concentrating too hard to pull it off completely. His cabin was not a remarkable space. One large room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, a bed in the far corner, shelves stacked with the kind of organized disorder that made sense to the person who had created it and to nobody else. He had lived in it for 7 years. Nobody had been inside it in 3. He pulled the second chair out from the table. "Sit down," he said. "Talk." She sat down. She set the bag on the floor beside her feet and folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with those red-rimmed eyes that were exhausted and alert at the same time, the eyes of a woman who had been crying and had decided she was finished with it. "My father died 9 days ago," she said. "Heart. The doctor said it was fast, that he probably didn't feel much." She stopped. "I don't know if that's true, or if he just said it to be kind." "Samuel was a good man," Nathan said. "It was the truest and most useful thing he could offer." "He was," she said. "He was also a man who trusted people he shouldn't have, and now I'm dealing with the consequences of that." She took a breath. "Victor Hale." Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. "Hale. You know him." "I know of him. That's enough." Victor Hale was the kind of man the frontier produced in reliable quantities, someone who understood that land was power, and that the law applied creatively was a more effective weapon than any gun. He had spent the last 4 years acquiring property throughout the valley. Not through any grand scheme or dramatic confrontation, but through patience, through contracts drafted in language that obscured its own meaning, through the quiet exploitation of people who were grieving or desperate or simply exhausted. He owned 11 parcels of land in the county now. He wanted more, and Samuel Whitmore's ranch sat on the best water source in the region. "Daddy took a loan from Hale 2 years ago," Clara said. "When the drought hit, I didn't know the terms until after he didn't tell me because he thought he could pay it back before it became a problem." Her voice stayed level, but Nathan could see the effort it cost her. He thought a lot of things were manageable that turned out not to be. "What are the terms?" "If the loan isn't repaid in full by this Friday, the property goes to auction, and Hale has the right of first purchase." She met his eyes. "He already has the money ready. I've heard from 3 different people that he's had it ready for 6 months. He was never going to let Daddy pay it back." "And the marriage provision," Nathan said. She looked at him steadily. "Daddy had an old land protection clause in his original property deed. Homestead law. If I'm married legally on record before the auction, the property can't be sold without my spouse's consent. Hale can't force the auction. He'd have to negotiate." She paused. "Which means he'd have to deal with someone who isn't a 28-year-old woman alone." The fire crackled. Nathan sat back in his chair. I understood everything she was telling him. He also understood everything she wasn't telling him, the weeks of trying to find another solution, the conversations that had gone nowhere, the doors that had closed before she'd finished knocking on them. Nobody came to a man like Nathan Cole with a proposition like this, unless every other door in the valley had already shut. "Why me?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "You have dozens of men in the valley closer than this," he said. "Younger men, men who actually know you." "The men in town who offered to help," she said carefully. "Offered to help in exchange for things I won't give them." She looked at her hands. "James Calloway told me he'd marry me if I signed the eastern pasture over to him as a wedding gift. He called it an investment." Her chin lifted slightly. "I told him what he could do with his investment, despite everything." Nathan felt something that was almost a smile working at the corner of his mouth. "Henry Marsh said he'd consider it if I was willing to be more—" She searched for the word cooperative. About the household. About his opinions on how the ranch should be run. About a lot of things. "And you told him no?" "I told him considerably more than no," Clara said. "I don't believe he'll repeat what I said to him in polite company." That surprised a short sound out of Nathan that was closer to a laugh than anything else. "The other," she continued, and her voice lost some of its careful steadiness, "made it clear that they weren't interested at all. Not in helping me, not in the ranch, not in—" She stopped. She looked at the fireplace for a moment. "In me," she finished quietly. "They made it clear that they weren't interested in me." The fire snapped and settled. Nathan watched her face as she looked into those flames, and he recognized something in her expression that he had seen in the mirror enough times to know exactly what it was. It was the particular exhaustion of someone who has spent years being assessed by people who have already made up their minds, who has learned to carry the weight of other people's conclusions about her without letting them see how heavy it gets. "But you never looked at me like that," she said. She turned back to him. "In all the years I can remember seeing you at the market on the trail those 2 summers, when you helped Daddy with the north fence, you never looked at me the way those men do. Like I was something funny. Or like I was invisible." She held his eyes. "You looked at me like I was just a person." Nathan didn't say anything. He was thinking about Samuel Whitmore. I was thinking about a February storm 7 years ago, when Nathan had been moving cattle down from the high pasture, and the weather had come in fast and brutal, and the kind of cold that turned judgment into mush had gotten into him before he understood what was happening. He had been found 2 miles from the lower trail, half buried in a drift by a man on a gray horse who had been out looking for a stray. Samuel Whitmore had hauled him onto that horse and gotten him to the ranch house and sat up half the night, making sure Nathan didn't slip away from the world. And in the morning, when Nathan had come back to himself enough to feel embarrassed and grateful in equal measure, Samuel had said only, "You'd have done the same." As if it was a simple thing. As if there was nothing to account for. Nathan had known from that night that he owed Samuel Whitmore a debt he would never be able to properly repay. Now he was looking at Samuel's daughter. "This marriage," he said slowly. "What are you expecting from it?" "Nothing beyond what I've asked for." Her voice was direct. "Legal protection for the ranch. Your name on the record. I'm not asking for your life. I'm not asking you to move down from this mountain and sit at my table every night and pretend we're something we're not." She paused. "I'll manage the ranch the same way I've been managing it. You go on with whatever it is you do up here. And when this is settled, when hail is dealt with and the land is safe, we can figure out what comes next. And if I say no..." She held his gaze. "Then I go back down the mountain," she said simply. "And I figure something else out." She meant it. He could see that she meant it. She had come here because she'd run out of other doors, but she hadn't come here to beg, and she wasn't going to start now. He thought about that for a while. "There's one thing you should understand before you decide anything," Clara said. Her voice had shifted slightly, not softer exactly, but more careful. "I know what people say about me." "Do you?" "They say I'm too big and too plain and too difficult and too much of everything that a woman isn't supposed to be." She said it without flinching, the way you say the name of something you've heard so many times, it no longer has the power to cut. "They've been saying it since I was 15 years old. I know that a man who's seen with me risks people saying things about his judgment, about his..." She searched for the word discernment. Nathan looked at her. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that I understand what I'm asking." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't much care what people say about my judgment." Something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly. Something more careful than relief. "I'll do it," he said. She blinked. "I'll marry you before Friday." He said it with the same tone he might use to say he'd fix the fence post or bring in the horses before the storm. Matter of fact, decided. "But I have a condition." "Name it." "This is a legal arrangement. It's a protection. It's nothing more than that, unless one of us decides it's something more." He held her eyes. "I won't have you feeling obligated to me for the rest of your life, and I won't have myself tangled up in something I didn't agree to. You understand?" "Perfectly," she said. "Then we have a deal." She looked at him for a moment, as if she was waiting for him to change his mind, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the condition under the condition. When nothing came, she nodded. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Nathan said. "Victor Hale doesn't lose quietly." She almost smiled. "Neither do I." That night, she slept in his bed while he took the chair by the fire, and in the morning, they rode down the mountain together, before the sun was fully up, arriving in town, with frost still on their collars, and their breath-making clouds in the cold air. And the agreement was filed at the county courthouse by mid-morning with the clerk. A young man named Davis, who seemed to feel strongly that he was witnessing something historically significant, scratching their names into the record with a pen that kept catching on the page. They were married. It was not a romantic occasion. Clara wore the same brown wool dress. Nathan wore his cleanest shirt, which was not particularly clean. There were no flowers, no guests, no words beyond the legal minimum. The judge who performed the ceremony, a man named Cargill, who smelled powerfully of pipe tobacco and who had clearly been pulled away from his lunch to do this, looked at them over his spectacles with the expression of a man wondering what story was attached to this particular situation. But when it was done, when the papers were signed and the thing was real and legal and recorded, Nathan looked at Clara and saw her exhale a long, slow breath, the kind that carries more than air, the kind that releases something a person has been holding for a very long time. She looked young in that moment, not fragile, just young. He had not expected that. They rode back up the mountain that afternoon, and that was when the complications began. The first morning, Clara burned the porridge. Not slightly catastrophically in the way that requires scrubbing the pot. Nathan came in from the horses to find the cabin full of smoke, and Clara standing over the stove with the expression of a woman who had just been insulted by a pot. "I can cook," she said immediately before he could speak. "I want you to know that. This is an aberration." "I believe you," he said. "I am a competent and experienced cook. I have been cooking for myself and my father since I was 12 years old. The porridge would like a word about that." She gave him a look that could have stripped paint. "The fire runs hotter than my stove. I miscalculated the time." Don't mim me." He was surprised to discover he was smiling. She made him eggs instead, and they were perfect. And she watched him eat them with the satisfaction of someone making a point, and he didn't say anything about the porridge again. The second morning she reorganized his shelves. He came back from checking the fence line to find everything rearranged, not chaotically, but into a system that was clearly logical to her and completely incomprehensible to him. "You moved my things," he said. "I organized your things. There's a difference. I knew where everything was. You knew where chaos was. Now you'll know where your belongings are." She handed him a coffee cup. "The flour is with the other dry goods. The tools are together. The medical supplies are in a box by the window where the light is better." He looked around his cabin. "It's different," he said. "It is." He picked up his coffee. He looked at the shelves again. "I suppose I'll adjust," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't yell. Should I have?" The last man who found me rearranging something threw a plate. Nathan set down his cup very carefully. "Who was that?" "Nobody important," she said quickly. "And a long time ago." He looked at her profile as she turned back to the stove. He didn't push it, but he noted it in the way he noted things that were useful to know. The third morning she woke before him. He came out of a deep sleep to the smell of real coffee, good coffee, the kind that announced itself before it was anywhere near your mouth, and found her sitting at the table with his survey maps spread out in front of her, frowning at them with the concentration of someone who intended to understand something and would not stop until she did. "These are my land maps," he said. "I know. You were using them as a tablecloth. They were getting coffee rings on them." He sat down across from her. "You're reading them." "I'm trying to." She pointed at a section of the northern boundary. "This line doesn't make sense to me. Your property should meet the Hendricks parcel here, but this shows a gap." He looked at where she was pointing. He had noticed the same thing himself and filed it away to deal with later. "There's a disputed strip," he said. 50 feet wide runs the whole north boundary. Hendricks and I have been meaning to sort it out. Have you talked to him?" "We've each talked to our respective mountains about it." She looked up at him. He looked back at her. Then something in her face shifted, and she laughed a genuine laugh, unexpectedly warm, startling them both a little. "That's a terrible way to handle a property dispute," she said. "It's been working for 3 years." "It hasn't been working. You've both just been ignoring it." "That is correct." She shook her head, but she was still almost smiling, and Nathan discovered that watching Clara Whitmore almost smile was not a thing he had any particular desire to stop doing. Outside, he heard the wind picking up. Inside, for the first time in years, the cabin felt occupied in a way that was different from his own presence in it. It felt inhabited. as if the rooms had been reminded that they were rooms, that they existed for people to be in them, that a space could hold more than one person without the walls objecting. He had lived alone for so long that he had stopped noticing the shape of silence. Clara had been in his cabin for 3 days, and he was beginning to remember what its absence felt like. That evening she stood at the window looking down at the valley below, the lights of the town just visible, scattered yellow points in the dark, and she said without turning around, "Hale's going to push back. I know. He's not going to simply accept this. No." She turned. "He'll try to find something wrong with the marriage, something to contest. Let him try. The papers are filed. The judge signed. Davis put it in the record himself." Nathan poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the table. "It's legal. He'll find another angle." "He will," Nathan agreed. "Men like Hale always do. They don't stop because they hit a wall. They walk along the wall until they find a weak spot." He paused. "Which means we need to make sure there aren't any." She looked at him. "You and me," he said. "We need to be consistent. We need to be clear. When we go down into that valley on Friday, when we stand in front of Hale, and whoever he brings with him, there can't be anything he can point at and question. You're saying we need to look like a real marriage. I'm saying we need to be convincing enough that he can't make a credible argument against it." He met her eyes. "Can you do that?" She held his gaze for a long moment. "I've been convincing people of things I wasn't sure of my whole life," she said quietly. "I reckon I can manage this one." But underneath the steadiness in her voice, Nathan heard something else, not fear exactly, but weight. The weight of a woman who had spent her entire adult life being measured by people who had already decided what she was worth, who was now being asked to perform a version of herself that the world would accept, who understood better than most people what it cost to walk into a room and hold your head up when you already knew what half the room was thinking. He had asked her if she could do it. The question, he realized, should have been whether she was tired of having to. That night, she sat by the fire after supper, and he watched her from the corner of his eye while he worked on a saddle strap that had been needing attention. She had her hands folded in her lap, and she was staring into the flames with the particular quality of attention that isn't really watching. She was somewhere else, someone else's memory, some conversation or moment he didn't have access to. "Clara," he said. She came back. Tell me what you know about Hale's operation, not just the loan, everything." She straightened slightly. "You think there's more to find?" "There's always more to find with men like him. They build their houses of cards on other people's secrets. That makes the whole thing fragile if you know where to look." She thought about it. Then she started talking. She talked for 2 hours. She talked about the Dawson family, who had lost their Southfield after signing a contract they hadn't been able to have a lawyer look at. She talked about the Rennick brothers, who had borrowed money from Hale after their barn burned and had been paying it back for 3 years with interest that seemed to grow faster than their crops. She talked about old Mrs. Patterson, who had sold her homestead and moved to her daughter's house in Cheyenne, and who Clara suspected had not been given a full and accurate account of what she was selling or for how much it was truly worth. She talked about her father. She talked about the conversations she had overhead, the documents she had found in his desk after he died, the figures that didn't add up, the signatures that looked less certain than they should have, the particular kind of pressure that left no visible mark. Nathan listened to all of it. When she finished, the fire had burned down to coals and the cabin had gone quiet again. "You've been collecting this," he said. "All of this." "I've been paying attention," she said. People don't notice when a woman pays attention. They see her and they think she's too busy worrying about her dress or her supper to understand what's happening around her. Something shifted in her expression. It's one of the few advantages of being underestimated your whole life. Nathan looked at her. He had spent a decade on this mountain, telling himself that other people were not his business, that the valley and its troubles and its inhabitants were something he had deliberately and permanently removed himself from. He had been extraordinarily comfortable with that arrangement, but sitting across from Clara Whitmore in the firelight, listening to everything she knew and everything she'd carried alone, he felt something that had been dormant in him for a very long time, beginning inconveniently to wake up. It wasn't sentiment. It wasn't romance. It was simpler and older than either of those things. It was the particular fury of a person who understands injustice and has finally run out of reasons to look away from it. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "All right, what?" "All right," he said. "We're not just going into that town to save your ranch." She was very still. "Victor Hale has been doing this to people for years," Nathan said. "One by one, quietly in ways that never quite broke any single law badly enough for anyone to act. And people let him because they were afraid, or because they were alone, or because they didn't think anyone else would stand with them." He stood up. He set the saddle strap down on the table. "But you've been keeping track," he said. "You have names, you have figures. You have enough that laid out together makes a picture no honest judge can look at and walk away from." Clara stood up slowly. Her eyes were careful, watchful, not quite willing to believe where this was going. "You're saying—" "I'm saying we go to the valley and we don't just stop Hale from taking your ranch," Nathan said. "We take him apart, all of it. Every farm he manipulated, every contract he twisted, every family he quietly gutted and left standing in the wreckage, wondering what went wrong." Silence. "Nathan." "Can you prove it?" he said. "What you just told me, do you have documentation?" She met his eyes. "Some of it. Enough to start. The Dawsons still have their copy of the contract. Old Mrs. Patterson never threw anything away. And I have my father's books, all of them. Hale thought he was careful, but Daddy wrote everything down." "Where are the books?" "At the ranch." She paused. "Hidden." "Of course they're hidden," he said almost to himself. "It won't be safe," she said. "Hale has money, and Hale has men, and Hale has friends in the county who owe him things. This isn't just a legal fight. It could get—" "I know what it could get," Nathan said. She looked at him for a long moment. The firelight moved across her face. She was calculating something, adding things up, checking something against something else. The way she had been doing her whole life, constantly assessing what was real and what wasn't, who could be trusted and who couldn't. "Why?" she said finally. "You said yourself this arrangement is nothing more than a legal protection. You don't owe the Dawsons anything. You don't owe Mrs. Patterson anything." She held his eyes. "Why would you want this kind of trouble?" Nathan thought about Samuel Whitmore hauling him onto a horse in a blizzard. He thought about the particular piece of a man who said you'd have done the same and meant it simply. "Because it's right," he said. It was, he knew, the most unfashionable possible answer. But Clara Whitmore looked at him when he said it, and something in her face changed. Not dramatically, not the way a face changes in a story when the moment of revelation arrives. Quietly. Like a door opening in a dark room, just enough to let a little light in. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like rushing water, and the mountain held them both in its cold and enormous silence. And below in the valley, the lights of the town burned in the dark, small and distant, and entirely unaware of what was coming down toward them. They rode down the mountain the next morning, before the sun had finished, deciding whether it intended to show up, and Clara sat straight in the saddle, the way a woman does when she has already made peace with whatever is waiting for her at the bottom. Nathan rode beside her and said nothing for the first mile, which suited them both. It was the second mile where things got complicated. "I need to warn you about something," Clara said. "Only one thing. About the town." She kept her eyes on the trail. "They're going to talk. They're already talking, you can be certain of that, because Davis at the courthouse couldn't keep a secret if his life depended on it, and he witnessed our paperwork yesterday morning, which means by yesterday afternoon, the entire valley knew that Nathan Cole had come down off his mountain and married Samuel Whitmore's daughter." She paused. "They won't be kind about it. They're rarely kind about anything. They'll be unkind in specific ways," she said. "About me, about my appearance, about why a man like you would choose a woman like me." She said it without any particular weight to it, the way you say the name of a disease you've had long enough to stop being surprised by it. "I want you to be prepared for that, because the way you respond to it will matter. If you look embarrassed, or if you look like you're tolerating something, Hale's people will see that, and they'll use it." Nathan glanced at her. And if I don't look embarrassed, then they'll look for something else, she said. But we'll have taken away the easiest weapon. He thought about this. Have you rehearsed this conversation? Only approximately 47 times since yesterday, she said. He almost smiled. They reached the valley floor as the morning light came fully up, and Clara was right. The town was already watching. He could feel it before they were halfway down Main Street. The particular quality of attention that a town has when it is watching something it has already formed an opinion about and is now simply waiting to see whether events confirm or disappoint it. Curtains moved. Conversations paused. Two men outside the hardware store turned and watched them pass with the careful, studied nonchalance of people who were watching as hard as they possibly could. Nathan kept his eyes forward. Beside him, Clara rode with her chin up and her hands easy on the reins, and he thought not for the first time that she had been doing this for a very long time. Walking into rooms that didn't want her. Sitting at tables where she wasn't entirely welcome. Refusing with a stubbornness that was almost architectural in its solidity to make herself smaller. They tied the horses outside the general store, and Nathan followed Clara inside, and the conversation that had been happening between the shopkeeper, a stout woman named Ruth Hadley, who had the particular authority of a woman who controlled access to flour and coffee, and two other women stopped completely the moment they came through the door. Ruth stared at Clara. Clara met her eyes pleasantly. "Morning, Ruth. I need to pick up an order my father placed before he passed should be set aside under the Whitmore name." Ruth kept staring. "Is it true?" she said. "You and Nathan Cole." "We were married day before yesterday," Clara said. "Filed at the courthouse. Judge Cargill presided." She smiled. It was a lovely ceremony. One of the other women, a narrow-faced woman named Edna Marsh, who happened to be the wife of the Henry Marsh, that Clara had declined with considerable enthusiasm, made a sound that was trying to be a laugh and landing somewhere south of it. "A lovely ceremony," she repeated. "My lord, Nathan Cole." She looked at Nathan with the expression of someone who has discovered something unexpected in their soup. "No offense, Nathan, but her." The store went very quiet. Nathan looked at Edna Marsh for a long moment without expression. "Ma'am," he said, "the only thing I'm hearing from you right now is that your opinion wasn't asked for." Edna's face went through several colors. Ruth made a small sound. The other woman seemed to find something extremely interesting to look at on the shelf behind her. Clara said nothing. But Nathan caught from the corner of his eye the smallest shift in her posture, something releasing very slightly, like a muscle that has been braced against a blow, and discovered that the blow didn't land. They collected the order. They left. Outside, Clara walked beside him toward the horses and said quietly without looking at him, "You didn't have to do that." "I know. Edna Marsh has a considerable talent for making other people's business miserable. She's going to—" "I don't particularly care what Edna Marsh is going to do," Nathan said. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, still not looking at him, "Thank you." He tipped his hat slightly. "Don't mention it." But he was aware as they rode toward the Whitmore ranch that something had shifted between them in that general store. Some calibration had occurred, some tacit renegotiation of terms that neither of them had explicitly agreed to, but both of them had registered. He had defended her not because the arrangement required it, not because anyone was watching who needed to be convinced, but because Edna Marsh had said something dismissive about a woman who had done nothing to deserve it, and it had made Nathan angry in a way that surprised him with its immediacy. He tucked that away and didn't look at it too closely. The Whitmore Ranch was a working ranch in the way that only a place tended by someone who genuinely loved the work could be, not grand, not polished, but cared for in every detail that mattered. The fence line was solid. The barn roof was recent. The yard was swept and organized with the disciplined tidiness of someone who had learned that chaos costs you time and time costs you everything. Clara dismounted before he did and moved through the yard with the ease of a woman on her own ground, which was exactly what she was. "The books are in the house," she said. "Come on." Inside, she went directly to the kitchen and moved the heavy wood box away from the wall with a matter-of-factness that suggested she had done this before. Behind it was a panel, and behind the panel was a shallow space, just large enough for a cigar box, and 3 ledger books. She carried them to the table. Nathan sat down across from her, and she opened the first ledger, and for the next 2 hours, they went through her father's records page by page, and what they found was worse than either of them had said out loud. Samuel Whitmore had been meticulous. Every transaction, every conversation with Victor Hale, every payment made and received had been written down in a cramped, careful hand, including the conversations, the promises that had been made, and not kept the moments when the terms had shifted in ways that Samuel had clearly understood too late. He knew, Clara said quietly. She was looking at an entry from 8 months before her father died, a long, careful notation of a meeting with Hale, including a direct record of what Hale had said. He knew what Hale was doing. He thought he could still find a way out. He was protecting you, Nathan said. He didn't want you to know how bad it was. He should have told me. Her voice had gone tight. I could have helped. I could have done something. Instead, he carried it alone for 2 years, and it... She stopped. She pressed her lips together. It killed him, she said. Not the heart, the weight of it. It killed him. Nathan didn't try to argue with that. Some things you let a person say because they need to say them, not because they're completely true or false, but because the truth in them is important enough to be spoken out loud. All right, he said after a moment. What else is in here? She turned pages. The second ledger was worse, because it wasn't just the Whitmore ranch. Samuel, in his methodical and quietly careful way, had been tracking Victor Hale's activity across the entire valley for the better part of 3 years. He had dates. He had figures. He had the names of 3 men who had witnessed specific transactions and could theoretically be called upon to speak to what they'd seen. He had copies of 2 contracts, not the originals, but his hand-copied transcripts with the specific clauses underlined that had been different from what the families had been told they were signing. Clara looked at it for a long time. He was building a case, she said. Yes. He was going to... She stopped. He was going to take this to someone, somewhere. He just ran out of time. We're not going to run out of time, Nathan said. She looked up at him. We have 3 days. Then we'd better move fast. He leaned forward. These 3 witnesses your father named. Do you know them? Cal Hendricks, Bo Dawson, and Robert Finch. She frowned slightly at the last name. Finch is a problem. He sold his place to Hale 6 months ago and moved to a smaller property on the west side. He's afraid of him. Afraid men can still be honest men, Nathan said, under the right circumstances. And what circumstances would those be? When they understand that the man they're afraid of is going down regardless, and the only question is whether they go down with him or stand apart from it. Clara studied him for a moment. You've dealt with men like Hale before. It wasn't quite a question. I've dealt with men who believe that being feared is the same as being safe, Nathan said. It isn't. Fear is only as strong as the thing holding it in place. When that starts to crack, the whole thing collapses. Every time. He sat back. We need to talk to Dawson first. He's the most likely to be willing. His family is still on their land, still fighting. He has the most to gain from this going right. Clara nodded slowly. And Hendricks? Hendricks is a cautious man, but he's also an honest one. If Dawson comes with us, Hendricks will listen. He looked at her. Can you set up a meeting somewhere Hale's people won't be watching? She thought about it. There's an old line cabin on the north side of the Dawson property. Been empty for 2 years. Nobody goes near it. She paused. Bo and I used to... She stopped. Something passed over her face quickly that Nathan filed away without examining. I know where it is. I can get word to Bo without going through the post. Do it today, Nathan said. We don't have time to be cautious about timing. She stood up. She was already moving 3 steps into the logistics of it, her mind working the way it clearly always worked, systematically, and without wasted motion. He watched her cross to the small writing desk in the corner and pull out paper and a pen, and he thought again, as he had been thinking more frequently than was probably useful, about the gap between the woman Clara Whitmore was and the version of her that the town had decided was real. Clara, he said. She looked up. Your father was right to trust you with this. He said it simply, without elaboration. Whatever he thought he was protecting you from, he was wrong about that part. You were capable of handling it. You always were. She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her eyes that she didn't quite let reach her face. "Write the note," he said. "I'll get the horses." The meeting with Bo Dawson happened that same evening. The line cabin was cold and smelled of old hay and disuse, and Bo Dawson arrived 17 minutes after they did, alone on foot, with the particular carefulness of a man who had been watching over his shoulder long enough that it had become involuntary. He was a compact man in his late 30s, with a sun-weathered face and hands that looked like they had been worked hard since childhood, which they had. He stopped just inside the door when he saw Nathan. He looked at Clara. "You said you were coming alone." "I said I was sending word," Clara said. "This is Nathan Cole. He's my husband." Bo stared at Nathan. Nathan stared back. "You married Nathan Cole," Bo said. "I did. The mountain man." "He's standing right here," Nathan said. Bo seemed to process this for a moment. Then something in his face shifted, not relaxed exactly, but recalibrated. "All right," he said. "What do you need?" "We need you to tell us everything you know about Victor Hale," Clara said. "And we need to know if you'd be willing to say it in front of a judge." Silence. Bo sat down on an overturned crate. He looked at the floor. He looked at his hands. He looked at Clara, with the expression of a man who wants very much to say yes and is running rapid internal calculations on the cost of it. "He'll know," Bo said quietly. "The minute I open my mouth in front of anyone official, he'll know." "He's going to know anyway," Nathan said. "The question is whether he knows before the case is made or after." "That's easy for you to say. You've got a mountain to go back to. I've got 4 children and a wife and 40 acres of land that Hale would happily take out from under me if I give him a reason." "He's already looking for a reason," Clara said, and her voice was gentle but direct. "Bo, you know that. He doesn't need one. When he's done with my ranch, and he's done with the Finch place, and he's done with whoever comes next, you're on his list. You were always going to be on his list." Bo's jaw tightened. "We have documentation," Nathan said. "Samuel Whitmore's records. 2 years of transactions, witness accounts, contract discrepancies. Enough to build a credible case." He paused. "But a case needs people. It needs someone willing to stand up and say, 'I saw this. This happened. I signed something I wasn't told the truth about.'" He looked at Bo steadily. "You're not going to be standing alone. I can promise you that." "You're one man," Bo said. "On a mountain. I'm a man with a wife who spent 2 years gathering evidence that would make a county prosecutor very interested in how Victor Hale runs his operation," Nathan said. "And I'm a man who doesn't have any particular reason to be afraid of Victor Hale or anyone who works for him." Bo looked at him for a long moment. He looked at Clara. "Your daddy," he said slowly. "Samuel. He came to me maybe 8 months before he passed. Asked me some questions. Careful questions like he was putting something together." He stopped. "I wondered later if that had anything to do with his heart going the way it did. All that weight." "It might have," Clara said quietly. "But he put it all in writing. He didn't want it to disappear with him." Bo was quiet for a while. Outside, the wind moved against the cabin walls, and somewhere in the dark, a horse shifted and blew. "My wife doesn't know all of it," he said finally. "What happened with the contract? I told her it was a misunderstanding, that we'd work it out. She's been worried enough without—" "She'd want to know," Clara said. "I know, Rebecca. She'd want to know." Bo let out a long breath. "All right," he said. "All right. Tell me what you need and I'll try." He looked at Clara. "For Samuel, and for Rebecca, and because I am damn tired of being afraid." Clara reached across and put her hand briefly on his arm. It was a simple gesture, not dramatic, not particularly demonstrative, but Bo Dawson straightened slightly when she did it, and Nathan watched it and understood something about the way Clara moved through the world that he hadn't fully understood before. People trusted her. Not because she asked them to, because she had earned it quietly over years, without any of the recognition that the earning had deserved. They left the cabin an hour later with Bo's agreement and the understanding that he would speak to Cal Hendricks directly, man to man, neighbor to neighbor, which was likely to be more effective than either Nathan or Clara doing it. The next problem arrived before they were halfway back to the ranch. A rider came down the trail toward them at a pace that wasn't quite an emergency and was considerably faster than casual. And when the lantern light caught his face, Clara said, "That's Tom Wheeler. He works for Hale." Nathan's hand moved instinctively to his side, then back. Not a gunfight. Not yet. Not here. Wheeler pulled up his horse in front of them and touched the brim of his hat with the particular kind of politeness that is indistinguishable from a threat if you understand the context. "Evening, Mrs. Cole." He said the name with faint emphasis, like a man testing whether the title was going to hold. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Hale sends his compliments. He wanted me to let you know personally that he's looking forward to concluding this situation in a businesslike manner." He smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "He also asked me to remind you that the auction begins at 9 on Friday morning. He wouldn't want there to be any confusion about the timeline." "No confusion," Nathan said. "We'll be there." "Wonderful." Wheeler's eyes moved to Clara and stayed there for a moment with an assessment in them that made Nathan's jaw tighten. "He also wanted to express his condolences about your father. Samuel was a fine man. It's a shame he put himself in such a difficult position." "My father," Clara said pleasantly, "was careful enough to write everything down. Every conversation, every transaction, every promise that was made, and whether it was kept." She smiled at Wheeler with a warmth that was entirely constructed and completely convincing. "I imagine Mr. Hale will find that interesting to hear." Something flickered in Wheeler's face. Very fast, almost invisible. But Nathan caught it. Wheeler tipped his hat again. "Good night, ma'am." He turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come at a slightly faster pace than the one he'd arrived at. They watched him go. "He'll report that back tonight," Nathan said. "I know. You shouldn't have told him about the records." "I know that too." She kept watching the darkness where Wheeler had disappeared. "But I needed to know if Hale knew they existed." She turned and looked at Nathan. "Did you see his face when I mentioned them?" Nathan had seen it. "He didn't know." "He didn't know," she confirmed. "Which means Daddy managed to keep them hidden. Which means Hale has been operating under the assumption that when Daddy died, the evidence died with him." She paused. "He's going to be rethinking that assumption tonight." "Which means he'll move faster." "Yes." Nathan looked at her. "We need to get those ledgers somewhere safe, not at the ranch." "I was thinking the same thing." She was quiet for a moment. "The courthouse. If we file them as evidence with the county clerk first thing tomorrow morning." "He can't touch them," Nathan said. "Not without it looking like exactly what it is." She nodded. "We'd need to write up the summary. Everything Daddy recorded organized in a way that makes the case clear." She looked at him. "Tonight." "Tonight?" he agreed. They rode the rest of the way in silence, which was not the silence of people who had nothing to say, but the silence of people who are saving their energy for what's coming. There was a difference Nathan had learned between those two kinds of quiet, and he was getting better at recognizing which one he was in. They worked by lamplight until close to 2 in the morning, Clara wrote. She had a clear, organized hand and a mind that moved through information the way water moves through terrain, finding the efficient path, not stopping where it didn't need to stop. Nathan read over what she wrote, caught 3 places where the logic needed strengthening, added the information about the Finch property from his own knowledge of the county records, and generally held the lantern and handed her coffee and kept his mouth shut, except when he had something useful to contribute. It was, he reflected, the most productive he had felt in years. Around midnight she looked up from the papers and caught him looking at her, and neither of them looked away immediately. "You're not what I expected," she said, "when I climbed up that mountain." "What did you expect? Someone harder to convince?" She looked back down at the papers. "Someone who would need more reasons." He considered this. "Samuel saved my life," he said. "That's a debt. I don't let debts stand. Is that all?" He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. She didn't ask him to explain that. She went back to writing. But something in the set of her shoulders was different, and Nathan understood in the way you understand things, you're not quite ready to say out loud, that the marriage they had agreed was only a legal arrangement was already becoming something else entirely, quietly, and without either of them quite deciding that it should. The morning of the third day came in cold and clear, and they rode into town with the ledgers wrapped in oilcloth and the written summary folded inside Nathan's coat, and they went directly to the county clerk's office, and Clara placed everything on the counter with the careful precision of a woman who has been waiting to do this for a long time. The clerk, not Davis, but his superior, a serious-faced man named Arthur Greer, looked at the stack of documents. "What am I looking at?" he said. "Evidence," Clara said, "of a pattern of fraudulent land contracts conducted in this county over a period of approximately 4 years. I'd like these formally registered as filed documents, time-stamped, witnessed by yourself as county officer." She looked at him steadily. "Today." Greer looked at the documents. He looked at Clara. He looked at Nathan, who was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who is prepared to be there for quite some time if necessary. Greer looked back at the documents. "This is going to create considerable difficulty," he said. "It's going to create considerable difficulty for the people responsible for it," Clara said, "which is somewhat the intention." Greer picked up the first ledger. He began to read. They watched his face as he read, and what happened to it over the next 10 minutes was interesting. It moved from skepticism to attention to something considerably more serious, and by the time he set down the ledger and looked up again, he was a different kind of careful. "I'll need to make copies," he said. "Make them," Clara said. "And I'll want to speak to the county attorney about this before Friday." "I'd strongly recommend that," Nathan said. Greer looked at him. "You understand what you're doing here?" "Filing documents with the county clerk," Nathan said. "Seems fairly straightforward." Something that might have been appreciation moved briefly across Greer's face. "Come back in 2 hours," he said. "I'll have the registration completed." They came back in 2 hours. The documents were registered. They walked out of the courthouse into the cold morning air, and Clara stopped on the courthouse steps and stood there for a moment, with her face tipped slightly toward the pale sky, and Nathan stood beside her and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say, and then she came back to earth and looked at him. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. "Hale is going to know about this by this afternoon. Most likely. He's going to be angry. Without question. And his men. Let me worry about his men." She looked at him. "This is my ranch, Nathan." "It is." "And my fight." "It is," he said again. "But you don't have to have it alone." He said it simply without drama. "That's what I'm here for." She held his gaze. In the street below the courthouse steps, the town moved around them, wagons and horses and people going about the ordinary business of a Wednesday morning, and none of them knew yet that the careful architecture of Victor Hale's 4-year operation was developing its first serious crack. They didn't know that a woman they had spent years dismissing had spent 2 of those years quietly keeping records, patiently gathering every piece of information her father had collected, waiting for the moment when she could do something with it that would actually hold. They didn't know. But Victor Hale was going to figure it out very soon. And then Thursday came. It came with a rider at dawn and a note delivered through the ranch's front gate, while Nathan was in the barn and Clara was in the kitchen, and the note said in the particular calm language of a man who is furious and doesn't intend to show it that Victor Hale would like to propose a meeting. A private meeting. Between Clara and himself. Without Nathan. Clara read it twice. She walked to the barn. She stood in the doorway and read it aloud. Nathan listened without interruption. "He wants me alone," she said. "He wants you without a witness." Nathan took the note from her and looked at it. The handwriting was precise, controlled the handwriting of a man who practiced discipline in everything. "He's rattled. The filing rattled him. He wants to offer you something, and he doesn't want anyone to know what it is. Or he wants to threaten me and doesn't want anyone to see that either. Also possible." He handed the note back. "What do you want to do?" She looked at the note. "I want to go," she said. "Clara, I want to look him in the face, she said, and her voice was steady and absolutely certain. I want to sit across from him and let him say whatever he's going to say, and I want him to understand that I'm not afraid of him. She met Nathan's eyes. He has spent years looking at women in this valley and calculating what it would take to make them bend. I want him to know that his calculation is wrong about me. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Not alone, he said. You said, I said, what do you want to do? I didn't say I'd let you walk into that man's office without backup. He held up a hand before she could object. Not in the room, outside, close enough to matter. She considered this. All right, she said. They went at noon. Victor Hale's office was in the most solid building on Main Street. 2 stories brick, with the careful, understated prosperity of a man who wanted you to understand that he had money without seeming to have to announce it. His secretary, a pale young man who looked at Clara with the elaborate blankness of someone trying very hard not to react, showed her in and told Nathan with excessive politeness that he was welcome to wait in the hall. Nathan sat down in the hall. He waited. He listened. The door was heavy, but not heavy enough to be completely soundproof, and he could hear the register of voices without the words. Hale's voice controlled and measured. Clara's voice clear and direct, not rising. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The quality of the exchange changed somewhere around the 12-minute mark. Hale's voice shifted, and Clara's stayed level, and then there was a silence that went on longer than it should have. Nathan stood up. He was 3 steps toward the door when it opened. Clara came out. She closed the door behind her with a quietness that was extremely deliberate. She looked at Nathan. Her face was entirely composed. Her eyes were something else, bright and still and furious in a way that had nothing to do with fear. We need to go, she said. What did he offer? Outside, she said. They went outside. She walked 2 buildings down before she stopped and turned and said, he told me to drop the filing and he'd give me back the loan documents free and clear. The ranch, no auction, no conditions. She paused. And he suggested that my father's records, if they were to be made widely known, would damage more than his reputation. He said there are people named in those ledgers who would not thank me for exposing their business. Nathan was very still. He's threatening the witnesses. He's suggesting that the Dawsons and the Hendrickses and everyone else my father wrote about might find themselves inconvenienced if this goes to court. Her voice was perfectly even. He was very polite about it, very calm. He offered me tea. What did you say? Clara looked at him. I told him, she said carefully, that I had grown up in this valley, and I knew every person my father had written about, and not one of them had signed their contracts intending to be cheated, and every single one of them deserved to have someone stand up and say so, regardless of what it cost me personally. She stopped. And I told him that if he touched one of them, if he so much as looked sideways at Bo Dawson, or Cal Hendricks, or anyone else, I would make certain that every document my father kept would be in the hands of the State Attorney General's office by the following Monday. Silence. Nathan looked at her. And, he said. And he stopped offering me tea, Clara said. Nathan stood there in the cold Main Street air, looking at the woman he had married 3 days ago in a ceremony that lasted 12 minutes and involved a judge who smelled of pipe tobacco, and he was aware of something happening in his chest that was entirely inconvenient and completely real. He had spent 7 years on that mountain, telling himself that the only thing worth protecting was his own solitude. He had built that belief carefully, brick by brick, out of every good reason he could find for it, and it had held extremely well. Right up until the moment Clara Whitmore pounded on his door with both fists at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. We need to tell Dawson, she said. Tonight. He needs to know Hale is moving against the witnesses. I'll ride out this evening, Nathan said. I'll come with you. Clara. I'll come with you, she said again, and there was nothing in her voice that invited negotiation. He looked at her. He looked at the brick building 2 doors down where Victor Hale was presumably rethinking his position on the tee. All right, Nathan said. They rode out that evening as the sun went flat and cold against the horizon, and the valley spread out around them in the quiet that comes just before dark in Wyoming. When everything goes still for a moment, as if it's listening, and Nathan rode beside Clara and thought about the fact that tomorrow was Friday, and that by this time tomorrow night, One of two things would be true. Either Victor Hale would be finished in this county, or they would be. The thought didn't frighten him. What surprised him was the reason it didn't. Because sitting beside him in the fading light, straight-backed and purposeful, and entirely undefeated by everything that had been thrown at her, was the one person he had met in years who made the world feel like it had a correct answer to it somewhere if you were stubborn enough to find it. He didn't say that. He wouldn't have known how to say that. But Clara glanced over at him as they rode, and something in her expression suggested she might have known anyway. And she looked back at the trail ahead, and they rode on into the dark together, with tomorrow waiting at the end of it, like a door that was about to open, whether they were ready or not. They reached Bo Dawson's place, just as the last light bled out of the sky, and the lamp in the front window told them someone was still awake, which was the only good news they'd had in the last 3 hours. Bo answered the door before Nathan finished knocking. He took one look at their faces and stepped back. "Come in." His wife Rebecca was at the table feeding their youngest, a boy of maybe 2, who was more interested in the food on the floor than the food on the spoon. She looked up when they came in with the calm wariness of a woman who had learned to read her husband's posture like weather. "What happened?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Hale knows about the filing," Nathan said. "He's going to move against the witnesses." Bo's face went through several things very quickly. Rebecca set down the spoon. "How specific was the threat?" Bo asked. "Specific enough that it wasn't deniable," Clara said. "He was polite about it. He usually is." She looked at Bo directly. "He mentioned you by name." The room went quiet, except for the boy who had found something interesting on the floor and was examining it with the complete absorption only very small children can manage during a crisis. "Rebecca," Bo said. "Don't," she said. "I should have told you. I know what you should have done." Her voice was even, but her hands on the table were not. "I've known for 2 years that something was wrong. You think I can't read a man who's carrying something he won't put down?" She looked at Clara. "How bad is it?" The contract Bo signed gave Hale the right to purchase the Dawson Eastfield at a fixed price, a price that's about a third of what the land is actually worth. He buried the clause in the 3rd page. Clara paused. "But if we can prove Bo didn't understand what he was signing, and we can prove it because Daddy's records show the original conversation, what Hale said the contract contained, then the clause is void." Rebecca looked at her husband. Bo looked at the table. "I should have read it more carefully," he said. "I know that. I knew it the day after I signed it." "Victor Hale has a lawyer who spent considerable time making that document as confusing as possible," Nathan said. "That's not ignorance on your part. That's deliberate deception on his. Knowing that and proving it in front of a judge are 2 different things." "They were 2 different things yesterday," Clara said. "We filed my father's records with the county clerk this morning. Arthur Greer has seen them. And Greer is a man who values his position enough to be concerned about what those records imply about what's been happening in his county on his watch." She leaned forward slightly. "By tomorrow morning, the county attorney will have been briefed. Greer won't sit on this, not with his name on the filing. And if Hale gets to the county attorney first," Bo said. "Hale getting to someone implies Hale is afraid," Nathan said. "An innocent man doesn't ride through the night to intercept a conversation. If he moves on the county attorney, that's its own evidence." Bo was quiet for a moment. Then Rebecca said quietly and completely, "We're going." Bo looked at her. "To the courthouse," she said. "Tomorrow. All of us." She picked up the spoon and handed it back to the boy, who took it with great solemnity. "I am not going to let that man take our Eastfield because he wrote something confusing on the 3rd page of a document. I am not going to let him do that to us or to anyone else." She looked at Clara. "What time?" 9 o'clock, Clara said. "The auction is scheduled for 9. We'll be there at 8. Bo looked at his wife for a long moment with the expression of a man who is very tired, and also, underneath the tiredness, deeply relieved. 8 it is, he said. They rode back to the ranch in full dark, and the cold had gotten serious in the way it does in Wyoming, when November finally decides to stop making suggestions and start giving orders. Nathan rode close enough that their horses' shoulders were almost touching, and Clara didn't move away from it. "Bo is going to be all right," she said. "Rebecca is going to make certain of it," Nathan agreed. She reminds me of my mother. Mama had that same quality, the ability to make a decision so completely that it stopped being a question. She was quiet for a moment. She died when I was 11. I don't remember all of her, but I remember that. Nathan didn't say he was sorry because she wasn't offering him a wound to tend, just a piece of information, a small piece of who she was. My mother left when I was 9, he said. Different situation, same result. You learn to get on without someone earlier than you should have to. Clara looked at him in the dark. He wasn't sure why he'd said it. He hadn't said it to anyone in approximately 30 years. I reckon that's why you went up that mountain, she said. Not accusing, just finding the shape of something. I reckon it's part of it. And now you're down off it, she said, riding to a neighbor's farm in the dark because a man named Hale is threatening people who don't deserve to be threatened. Seems like the thing to do. Nathan Cole. Her voice had something in it that he couldn't quite categorize. You are considerably more complicated than you look. Most people are, he said. You just have to bother finding out. She turned away, but not before he caught the edge of something on her face that made the cold air feel slightly less cold than it had a moment ago. The ranch was quiet when they got back. Too quiet, Nathan thought. And then he understood why. The barn door was open. He had latched it when they left. He was certain of it. He latched barn doors the way other people locked houses automatically correctly every time. He put his hand out and touched Clara's arm without speaking. She stopped her horse immediately and understood, without needing to be told what the gesture meant, because she was that kind of person. He dismounted. He moved to the barn. Inside, everything looked untouched. The horses in their stalls, the tack on its hooks, the feed where it should be. But someone had been in there recently enough that the air still held the memory of it. Nathan moved through the space carefully and found what he was looking for in the far corner, a small oil lamp extinguished that hadn't been there this morning. Hale's men. Making sure they knew the place had been visited, that the visit could be repeated. It was a message, not a crime, which made it exactly the kind of thing Victor Hale specialized in. Nathan came back out. Someone was in the barn, he told Clara. Her jaw tightened. They took anything. Nothing to take. That's not what it was. She understood immediately. He wants me to know he can reach me here. He wants you frightened, Nathan said. He wants you to spend tonight deciding that the cost of tomorrow is too high. She looked at the dark barn. Then he doesn't know me very well, she said. They went inside. Nathan checked every window, every latch, every place where an unannounced visitor might find an easy entry, and Clara watched him do it without objecting, which told him she was more shaken than she was letting on, and was wise enough not to pretend otherwise. When he finished, she was sitting at the table with her father's photograph in her hands, a small portrait, the kind taken by a traveling photographer, slightly blurred at the edges, in the way those early photographs often were. How was a gentleman, she said. People didn't always see that. They saw a big rancher with a loud voice and strong opinions, and they thought they were seeing the whole of him. She set the photograph down carefully. But he cried at the end of every winter, every single year when the first real thaw came and the ground started to soften. He said it was because his father had made him work the fields from age 7, and spring always felt like being let out of a trap. She looked at the photograph. He thought that was a weakness. I thought it was the most honest thing I'd ever seen a man do. Nathan sat down across from her. He'd want you to sleep, he said. I know. Tomorrow is going to be long. I know that too. She looked up. Are you afraid? He thought about it honestly. No, he said. But I'm careful. There's a difference. What are you careful about? Hale having something I haven't accounted for, Nathan said. Men like him don't bring their best card to the first meeting. He showed us the threat tonight. That's not everything he has. What else could he have? I don't know, and that's what I'm careful about. Clara looked at him. You think he has something on you? He met her eyes. It's possible. I haven't always lived a careful life. There are things in my past that aren't. He stopped. I came to this mountain for reasons that aren't entirely about preferring the quiet. She held his gaze steadily. Do you want to tell me? He was quiet for a moment. Then, not tonight, not with tomorrow what it is. He paused. But after, if you want to know. I want to know, she said simply. Something settled between them at that the way things settle when a truth is told that clears the air, not resolved, not finished, just acknowledged, placed on the table between two people who have decided they can look at it directly. Get some sleep, Clara, he said. She went to bed. He stayed up. He sat by the window with his rifle across his knees and a cup of cold coffee he didn't drink, and he watched the yard and the trail and the dark beyond the fence line, and he thought about Friday morning and what was coming, and whether he had accounted for everything he needed to account for. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, he stopped thinking and started listening, which was more useful, and that was when he heard the horse. One horse. Moving carefully on the trail from town. Not a gallop, not an emergency pace, but the deliberate, careful walk of someone who wanted to arrive quietly. Nathan was on his feet before the thought was fully formed. He was at the door. He watched through the front window as the rider came into the yard and stopped. The rider dismounted. It was Robert Finch. Nathan opened the door. Finch was a man in his mid-50s, with a posture that had been defeated once and never quite recovered, and eyes that had been watching for trouble for so long that watching for trouble had become the only expression they knew. He looked at Nathan with those eyes and said nothing for a moment. I heard you went to see Dawson, he said finally. Word travels fast. In this valley it does. Finch looked past Nathan into the house. Is she here, Clara? She's asleep. Don't wake her. I just need to say something, and then I'm going to go. He pulled his hat off his head and turned it in his hands, which was the most nakedly nervous gesture Nathan had ever seen from a grown man. I sold my place to Hale because he gave me no choice. That's the truth of it. He didn't threaten me with anything I could have walked into a sheriff's office and reported. It was quieter than that. He just made very clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate in ways that were never quite specific enough to be actionable. He stopped. And I told myself it was done, and I was out, and that was that. And now, Nathan said. And now he sent a man to remind me of certain things I did when I was younger. Things that could be made to look worse than they were if someone wanted to make them look that way. Finch met his eyes. He's going to use me, not as a witness for me, as a weapon against you. He's found something in Nathan Cole's past that he thinks will be useful tomorrow morning. Nathan was very still. What did he find? He said. Finch looked at him with something that might have been apology. Kansas, 11 years ago. A man named Rourke. The air in the yard went cold in a different way. How much does he know? Nathan said. His voice was completely level. Enough to tell a story, Finch said. Whether it's the right story or not is another matter. But it's enough to stand up in front of that courthouse tomorrow and make people wonder. Nathan processed this in silence for 4 seconds, which felt considerably longer. Does Clara know? Finch asked. No. She's going to find out tomorrow if you don't tell her tonight. I know. Finch put his hat back on. I came because Samuel Whitmore was a good man to me when a lot of people weren't, and because I'm tired of being afraid. He looked at Nathan steadily. I'll stand up tomorrow and say what I know. What Hale did to me and what I watched him do to others. I'll say it in front of whoever needs to hear it. He paused. But I thought you should know what's coming. I appreciate that, Nathan said. Finch nodded. He got back on his horse. He rode away into the dark without another word, and Nathan stood in the yard and watched him go, and then looked up at the sky for a moment, the way a man does when he is asking questions of something larger than himself and isn't expecting answers, but feels the need to ask anyway. Then he went inside. He sat down at the table. He thought about whether to wake Clara. He thought about what Finch had said, that she would find out tomorrow if he didn't tell her tonight. He thought about what it would feel like to stand in front of a courthouse and have something from your past, surfaced by a man with an agenda while the woman beside you was hearing it for the first time. He got up and knocked gently on the bedroom door. Clara. A pause. Then, with the alertness of someone who hadn't been as deeply asleep as she should have been, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, but I need to tell you something. She came to the door. She looked at his face. "Sit down," she said immediately, and stepped aside to let him into the room and sat across from him on the edge of the bed with the lamp turned low. He told her about Kansas. He told her about Rourke. He told her all of it. Not the version he had told himself over the years. Not the edited account that made him look better, but the actual sequence of events in the order they had happened, including the parts that didn't reflect well on him. It took about 12 minutes. It was the most he had said about himself in years. When he finished, she was quiet. The lamp moved with a draft from somewhere. "Did he deserve it?" she said. Nathan looked at her. "He deserved consequences. Whether the consequences he got were the right ones, I've been trying to answer that for 11 years. Were you protecting someone? Yes. Then you weren't wrong about the reason." She looked at him steadily. Men like Hale are going to try to make it about the action and not the reason. They always do. Because reasons require understanding a person, and understanding a person requires treating them like one. He looked at her. "Is there anything else I need to know before tomorrow?" she said. "No." "Then get some sleep," she said. "I mean it this time." He almost laughed. He went back to the front room. He did not sleep. Friday arrived, the way important days often do, too quickly, not slowly enough, and with a quality of light that seemed indifferent to the significance of what was happening beneath it. Clara was up before dawn. Nathan had coffee on before she came out of the bedroom. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had also not slept particularly well and was not going to mention it. "Ready," she said. "Ready," he said. They rode into town at 7:45. They were not alone. Bo and Rebecca Dawson were already there, standing outside the courthouse, with their eldest boy, a 14-year-old, who had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. Cal Hendricks was there, a tall, spare man Nathan had seen at the market a handful of times, who shook Nathan's hand with the grip of someone who has made a decision and intends to hold to it. Robert Finch was there, standing slightly apart from the others, hat in hand, looking like a man who has been afraid for a long time and is trying something different. Clara stopped when she saw them all. She stopped completely for just a moment, and Nathan watched something move through her that was too large to be simply surprise. It was the particular shock of a person who has spent so long expecting to fight alone that the sight of company lands like a physical thing. She walked to them. She didn't say thank you right away because she was working on being able to speak at all, and they seemed to understand that because they waited. "Samuel would be glad to see this," Bo said finally. Clara nodded, once, firmly. "Yes," she said, "he would." Victor Hale arrived at 9:05. He came with his lawyer, a thin man named Prescott, with a briefcase that looked expensive and a face that had learned to express nothing, and 2 men. Nathan recognized as regular fixtures on Hale's property, large and quiet, and placed with the deliberate casualness of men who were there for a reason that wasn't being stated. Hale himself was a man in his late 50s, who had the appearance of someone who had constructed himself carefully over many years. Well-dressed, unhurried, with the particular confidence of a person who has won enough times to believe that winning is simply what happens when he shows up. He looked at the group assembled on the courthouse steps with the expression of a man who has found something unexpected in his path and is deciding how to step around it. Then his eyes found Clara. "Mrs. Cole," he said. He made the name sound like a question and a challenge simultaneously. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" Clara said. "I thought we'd resolved our conversation yesterday. You proposed that I abandon a legally filed document and allow you to acquire my father's ranch for a fraction of its value," Clara said. Her voice carried clearly in the cold morning air. "I declined. That's not a resolution, Mr. Hale. That's a conversation that's about to continue in front of a great many people." Hale looked at the group. His eyes stopped on Finch. Something moved in his face so fast, so controlled, that only someone watching very carefully would have seen it. Nathan was watching very carefully. "Robert," Hale said, quietly. "Just the name. The way a man says a name when he wants the person to remember something." Finch swallowed. His hands tightened on his hat. "My name is Robert Finch," he said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. and I have something to say to the county attorney this morning." The crack in Finch's voice didn't matter. The fact that he said it mattered. And Hale heard the difference between those two things, because he was a man who understood leverage, and what he was hearing was the sound of leverage releasing. The county attorney arrived at 9:05. His name was Morrison, and he was a careful, deliberate man who did not like surprises or public spectacle, and he was clearly not delighted to find a small crowd on his courthouse steps first thing on a Friday morning. He looked at Nathan, then at Clara, then at Hale, and then at the stack of folders that Arthur Greer materialized at his elbow, carrying, and the look on his face shifted into something significantly more focused. "I think," Morrison said, "we should go inside." They went inside. The next 2 hours were the kind of hours that are talked about later, compressed and important, moving faster than they should, containing more than their size should allow. Morrison sat at the head of the table in his office, Greer beside him with the filed documents, and he heard first from Clara, then from Beau, then from Cal Hendricks, who turned out to have a memory like a land deed, precise, complete, and impossible to reasonably dispute. Finch went last, and his voice cracked twice more, and both times he kept going, and by the time he finished, the room had the particular silence of a space where something irrevocable has just been said. Prescott Hale's lawyer objected 4 times. Morrison overruled 3 of the 4, and noted the 4th, for the record, in a way that suggested he was noting it as a curiosity rather than a credit. Then Hale leaned forward and looked at Morrison and said very calmly, "I think you should know that Nathan Cole, who has inserted himself into this proceeding as Mrs. Cole's husband, has a criminal history in the state of Kansas. A matter involving a man named Rourke. I have documentation." Silence. Every eye in the room shifted to Nathan. Clara didn't look at Nathan. She looked at Hale. "I have documentation too," she said. Hale looked at her. "My husband told me about Kansas last night," she said. "He told me the full account. And what he told me is somewhat different from whatever version you've assembled from whatever source you used to assemble it." She met Hale's eyes without flinching. "But I'll tell you what's interesting to me, Mr. Hale. In order to find that information and attempt to use it this morning, you spent considerable time and resources investigating the private history of a man who married a woman you were planning to defraud." She tilted her head slightly. "That tells me how worried you are, and that worries you considerably more than anything in Kansas." Morrison looked at Hale. Hale's lawyer put his hand on Hale's arm. Hale did not look like a man who was accustomed to having his arm touched at a moment like this. "The Kansas matter," Morrison said carefully, "is not before this proceeding. The matter before this proceeding is a series of documented allegations regarding fraudulent contract terms across multiple properties in this county." He looked at the folders, "which I intend to review thoroughly." He looked at Hale. "The auction this morning is postponed pending that review." "You can't," Prescott started. "I can," Morrison said. "And I am." Hale stood up. How was controlled? He was always controlled. But something underneath the control had shifted, and Nathan could see it, the particular rigidity of a man who is holding himself very carefully because the alternative is visible collapse. "This isn't finished," Hale said. He said it to Clara. She looked up at him from her chair, and she was a woman whose father had died 9 days ago, and who had climbed a mountain in the dark and asked a stranger to marry her, and spent 3 days fighting for a ranch and a principal and a group of people who had been quietly wronged for years, and she looked at Victor Hale, and she did not look like a woman who was afraid of anything he could do. "No," she said. "It isn't, but it's starting to finish, and you know it." Hale left. His men left after him. Prescott closed his briefcase with the expression of a man recalculating something important about his professional future. The room let out a collective breath. Beau put his head in his hands for a moment. Rebecca put her hand on his back. Cal Hendricks looked at the ceiling. Robert Finch sat very still with his hat in his lap and his eyes closed, and his expression was the expression of a man who has put something down that he has been carrying too long and is not quite sure yet how to stand without the weight of it. Clara sat at the table. Nathan sat beside her. She put her hand over his on the table briefly, just for a moment, and then removed it. but that was enough, and he understood it for what it was, which was not gratitude exactly, but something older and more direct than gratitude. It was the gesture of a person who has found something they weren't expecting and doesn't yet have words for it. Morrison was reviewing documents. Greer was making notes. Outside through the courthouse window, Nathan could hear the sounds of the town continuing its Friday morning wagons, voices the ordinary movement of ordinary life. None of them out there knew yet what had just shifted in the room behind them. None of them knew that the thing that had been quietly wrong in this valley for 4 years had just been handed to the right person in the right room with enough documentation to make ignoring it impossible. But they would know. The news would move through this town the way all news moved through a valley town, quickly, imperfectly, in versions that would grow and change and be argued over. And by the time it settled into something resembling the truth, Clara Whitmore Cole would be the name at the center of it, and not for the reasons the town had ever thought to associate with her. "What happens now?" Bo asked. Morrison looked up. Now I read everything your neighbor's husband filed on behalf of his wife yesterday morning, and I determine what action is warranted, and I contact the state attorney's office, which I should have done some months ago, if what I'm seeing in these documents was actually happening in my county." He looked somewhat uncomfortable with that last part, which suggested he was a man with a conscience which was something. "And Hale?" Cal asked. "Mr. Hale," Morrison said carefully, "is going to have a very busy few months ahead of him." They left the courthouse at 11. The cold had gotten a degree worse since morning, and the sky had developed the particular pale gray quality that preceded serious snow, and Main Street looked exactly as it always looked. On a Friday morning, shops open, a few wagons, people going about their business. Except that Nathan was aware, walking down the courthouse steps beside Clara, that it looked different to him than it had before. He had spent 7 years on that mountain, making the world smaller and simpler and easier to manage. He had reduced everything to the size of what he could control: his land, his horses, his silence, his solitude. Clara had spent those same years making the world larger than it wanted to let her be, pushing at edges, holding her ground, paying attention when nobody thought she was, carrying things she was never thanked for carrying. They met in the middle on a mountain trail in November, with frost on the porch rail and a proposition that neither of them had been entirely prepared for. And now here they were. Edna Marsh was coming out of the millinery shop as they reached the bottom step, and she stopped and looked at them. And for a moment her face did its assessment, the quick automatic inventory that she applied to everything and everyone, and then something shifted in it. Not warmth exactly, but the specific absence of the contempt that had been there before. As if something that had seemed certain had become uncertain, and uncertainty required at minimum a different quality of attention. She nodded. Clara nodded back. Edna went on her way. Nathan looked at Clara. "Quite a week," he said. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Quite a week," she agreed. "Hale isn't done," he said. "Morrison will review the files and move forward. But Hale has money, and Hale has time, and Hale will find lawyers who are better than Prescott, and this will take longer than today." "I know. It could take months. There will be hearings, depositions. He'll try to discredit the documents. He'll try to discredit Finch." "I know all of that," she said. "I've known all of that since I read my father's ledgers for the first time." She looked at him steadily. "It doesn't change anything." "Why not?" "Because the right thing to do isn't the thing you do when it's quick and easy and guaranteed to work out," she said. "It's the thing you do when it's slow and hard and you're not entirely sure how it ends." She paused. "My father taught me that. He was a gentler man than this situation required, but he was right about that part." Nathan looked at her. The sky behind her was the pale gray of incoming snow, and the cold was serious and getting more so. And the street was ordinary and full of people who had no idea what had happened in the room behind them, and standing in the middle of all of that, Clara Whitmore looked like a woman who had come a very long way in a very short time and was not even slightly inclined to turn back. He had married her as a legal arrangement. He had married her because of a debt. I understood now, with the clarity of a man who has been wrong about something for a long time and has finally had the decency to admit it, that neither of those things was the reason he was standing beside her on a courthouse step in a Wyoming winter, unwilling to be anywhere else. "We should get back," Clara said. "The horses are going to be cold." "The horses are fine," he said. "They're Wyoming horses." "You use that as an explanation for everything." "It explains a surprising amount." She looked at him with something in her eyes that was warm and complicated and entirely unconcealed, and Nathan looked back at her and felt for the first time in 7 years that the world was large enough to be worth being in. Then from across the street, one of Hale's men, the larger of the two who had come with him that morning, called out in a voice deliberately pitched to Carrie, "Enjoy your day, Mrs. Cole. Mr. Hale sends his regards." The street went quiet. People stopped. Clara stood exactly where she was. She didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't look away from the man across the street. "Tell Mr. Hale," she said clearly and calmly, "that we'll see him in court." The man's expression didn't change, but he didn't say anything else either, and after a moment he turned and walked away, and the street started breathing again, and an old man outside the barber shop who Nathan didn't know touched the brim of his hat toward Clara in the particular gesture that meant in the language of the frontier something between respect and recognition. Clara saw it. She stood a little straighter, and Nathan Cole, who had spent 7 years on a mountain above a valley that had stopped concerning him, felt the last reasonable argument for going back up there alone dissolve completely and entirely like frost in the morning sun. The snow came that night, not the polite kind that dusts fence posts and makes everything look clean and forgiving in the morning. The serious kind, the kind that Wyoming sends when it has decided you have been comfortable long enough and wants to remind you of certain facts about the world. By midnight, it was coming sideways, and by 2 in the morning, the drifts against the barn wall were 3 feet deep, and by the time pale light suggested that somewhere above the clouds a sun existed and intended eventually to participate, the Whitmore Ranch looked like something had been trying to bury it. Nathan was up before the light fully arrived, moving through the barn, with a lantern checking the horses, clearing the water troughs, doing the work that needed doing, regardless of what had happened yesterday, or what was still coming. Physical work had always been the thing he trusted most. You put effort in, you got result out. The accounting was honest. He had built his entire life on that principle, and it had served him well enough up until the point where it started to feel less like a principle and more like a hiding place. I was thinking about that distinction when Clara appeared in the barn doorway. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without a word and stood beside him, looking at the horses, and they drank their coffee in the particular comfortable silence that neither of them had explicitly agreed to, but had somehow arrived at over the course of a week that had contained enough noise and difficulty and tension to last most people considerably longer. "Morrison sent a rider this morning," she said finally. "Early, before the snow got bad." Nathan looked at her. "What did he say?" "He's contacted the state attorney's office in Cheyenne. He wants the original ledgers, not the copies the originals sent by protected courier, by end of next week." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "He also said that Hale's lawyer has already filed a motion to have the documents excluded on the grounds that they constitute hearsay." Of course he did. "Morrison expects the motion to fail. He said, and I am quoting him directly, that the documentation is more comprehensive than anything his office has seen in a property dispute in 15 years, and that my father was, and I quote, either an extremely careful man or a man who knew exactly what he was building toward." She paused. Morrison said it like he wasn't sure which one impressed him more. "Both," Nathan said. "Samuel was both." Clara nodded. She kept looking at the horses. "There's something else." He waited. "Prescott Hale's lawyer resigned this morning. Sent Hale a letter last night apparently. 2 of the men Hale employs on his property have asked Arthur Greer if there's any way to give information to the county attorney without putting their names on a formal document right away." She looked at Nathan. "They're scared, but they're starting to move toward the light." "Hale's operation is cracking," Nathan said. "It's cracking fast." She turned to look at him. "Faster than I expected. I thought this would take months to even begin to move. I thought we'd spend all winter fighting for the right to be heard." She stopped. "I think Daddy's records were more damaging than even I understood when I first read them. I think Hale knows it." A man who's been careful for 4 years knows exactly how careful he was, Nathan said. And he knows exactly where he wasn't. Those are the places that terrify him. Clara was quiet for a moment. I want to tell you something, she said. All right. When I climbed that mountain and knocked on your door, I had a list, in my head, of what I needed and what I was willing to offer, and what the terms were, and what I wasn't prepared to compromise on. She looked at her coffee cup. It was a very organized list. I had been making it for about 4 days since I realized there was no other option, and you were the name I kept coming back to. Why did you keep coming back to my name? She looked up at him. Because you're the only man in this valley who ever looked me in the eye when he spoke to me. Every other man I can think of, when they talk to me, their eyes go somewhere else. Not even anywhere interesting, just elsewhere. Like they're waiting for the part of the conversation that matters, which apparently doesn't include whatever I'm saying. She paused. You looked at me like what I said was the thing worth listening to. I don't know if you know you do that. Nathan looked at her. I do know, he said. I do it because it's true. She held his gaze for a moment, and then she looked back at the horses, and the silence between them was a different quality than it had been before. Warmer. Less careful. More like the silence between people who have stopped maintaining a particular distance and have not yet decided what to do about that. Your list, he said. Did this situation end up looking anything like what was on it? She thought about it. The legal part did, she said. The rest of it went considerably off script. In a good way or a bad way? She almost smiled. Ask me again when Hale is finished. They spent the morning working separately and together, the way people do when they share a space and have figured out each other's rhythms, moving around each other without colliding, each taking the jobs that needed doing without discussion or negotiation. Clara cleared the path to the water pump. Nathan repaired a fence section that the snow had pushed sideways. They met back at the house at midday, and she made soup from what was in the larder, and they sat at the table and ate it, and the ordinariness of it was so complete that Nathan had to make a deliberate effort not to think about how long it had been since he'd sat at a table at midday with another person and eaten soup. A long time. Too long to calculate without making himself feel something he wasn't entirely ready for. The second rider came in the early afternoon. This one wasn't from Morrison. He was from Hale. A different man than Wheeler, younger, with the look of someone who had been told to be polite and was concentrating hard on it. He came to the door and handed Clara a sealed letter and said, Mr. Hale asked me to wait for a reply, ma'am. And Clara took the letter and told him to wait on the porch, and she came inside and opened it at the table. Nathan watched her face as she read it. Her expression went through 3 things in the space of 10 seconds. The first was surprise. The second was something he couldn't immediately name. The third was a careful, deliberate composure that she built over the first 2, the way you build a wall systematically for a reason. She set the letter down and slid it across to him. He read it. Victor Hale was offering a settlement, not the conditional threatening arrangement he had proposed in his office 2 days ago. A genuine settlement, the loan forgiven completely. The auction canceled, the Whitmore property released from any claim with full documentation filed with the county. In addition, he was offering financial restitution to the Dawson and Hendricks families for the difference between what their contract stated and what their land was actually worth at time of signing. He was offering Robert Finch first right of repurchase on his former property at the price Finch had originally been paid, indexed for 2 years of inflation. In exchange, he wanted the original ledgers returned, rather than submitted to the state attorney's office. He wanted the Dawson, Hendricks, and Finch families to sign statements indicating that the matter had been resolved to their satisfaction. And he wanted a signed agreement from Clara, indicating that she would not pursue further legal action. Nathan read the whole thing twice. Then he looked up at Clara. He's terrified, he said. I know. This is a man dismantling his own house before someone else can set fire to it. Nathan set this letter down. He thinks if he settles fast enough, he can contain the damage. He probably can, Clara said. Partially. The state attorney's office has been contacted, but if the witnesses sign off and the ledgers don't go to Cheyenne, the case becomes much harder to build. What do you want to do? She was quiet for a long moment. "What I want to do," she said slowly, "is take every penny of what he's offering and close every door he's left open and make sure my ranch and my neighbors' properties are protected so thoroughly that Victor Hale can never touch any of them again." She paused. "That's what I want." "But," Nathan said, because there was clearly a but. "But if we settle, he walks away. He takes his operation to another county, another valley, another group of families who don't have a Samuel Whitmore keeping meticulous records." She looked at Nathan. "How many ranches has he destroyed that we don't know about? How many families quietly lost things to this man before he ever came to our valley?" Nathan had been asking himself the same question. "If we don't settle," he said carefully, "this goes to Cheyenne. It becomes a state matter. The families get dragged through a much longer process with much less certainty of outcome." "I know. Bo and Rebecca have 4 children. Finch is barely holding on as it is. Hendricks is 63 years old." "I know all of that." "It has to be their choice," Nathan said. "Not yours, not mine, theirs." She met his eyes. "Will you ride with me?" He was already standing up. They brought the letter to Bo first, because Bo was the most affected, and because Rebecca's clear-eyed practicality was the best anchoring force in the room when decisions of this weight needed to be made. Rebecca read the letter, standing at her kitchen counter, while Bo read it over her shoulder. And when they finished, Rebecca set it down and turned and looked at Clara and said, "What does the settlement actually guarantee? Full legal release of your East Field. Restitution payment within 30 days, certified by the county clerk. And if he doesn't pay within 30 days, the settlement agreement becomes void and all documents go to Cheyenne." Rebecca looked at her husband. Bo looked at the letter. He looked at Clara. He looked at Nathan. "I want him stopped," Bo said. "I want him stopped the right way so he can't do this to the next valley." He stopped. "But I also have 4 children, and I am so tired I can barely see straight, and Rebecca—" His voice went rough. He stopped. "Bo," Rebecca said quietly. "Rebecca has been carrying this with me, and she never once—" He stopped again. "Take the settlement," Rebecca said. "Take it, and make it airtight, and make him pay every cent within 30 days, and make sure it's on record with Greer, so there's no question it happened." She looked at Clara. "And then you talk to Morrison. Not about pulling back the state contact that's already done, and it should stay done, but about what the settlement represents. Because a man who settles this fast, and this completely, is a man who knows what the records would show. That's its own kind of testimony." Nathan looked at her with something very close to admiration. "That's," Clara started. "That's what Samuel would have done," Rebecca said simply. "He was a patient man. He knew when to take the win in front of him and trust that the larger truth would eventually find its own way out." Clara swallowed. "All right," she said. Cal Hendricks agreed without deliberation. He read the letter, put it down, and said, "Get me my restitution in writing with Greer's signature on it, and I'll sign whatever I need to sign." He paused. "And you tell Morrison from me that I'll answer any question from Cheyenne whenever they want to ask it, settlement or no settlement. I've got nothing to hide about what happened to me." Robert Finch cried. Not dramatically, just quietly, with his head bowed and his shoulders shaking slightly when he read the part about the right of repurchase on his former property. Clara put her hand on his arm the way she had with Bo in the line cabin, and Finch got himself together and looked up and said in a rough voice, Tell him yes before he changes his mind." They sent Hale's rider back with a response that same afternoon. They would review the settlement terms with the county clerk and respond formally within 24 hours. It was Nathan's idea to add that condition, not to drag out the process, but to ensure that Morrison was involved in reviewing the language before anyone signed anything, because the last time these families had signed documents drafted by Victor Hale's people, they had been signing things they didn't understand. Morrison reviewed the draft settlement by 8 o'clock that evening, made 4 changes to the language that tightened the guarantees considerably, and sent word that he had briefed the state attorney's contact in Cheyenne, and that the contact's position was that a properly structured settlement with full documentation on record served the broader interest of accountability, even if it concluded the local case. Hale's new lawyer, not Prescott, who had exited the situation, permanently accepted Morrison's revisions without negotiation, which told Nathan everything he needed to know about how completely Hale understood his own position. The settlement was signed on Monday morning. All of it. The loan, release, the auction cancellation, the Whitmore deed, clear and unencumbered, the restitution agreements for the Dawsons and Hendricks, the repurchase arrangement for Finch signed, witnessed, filed, and documented with the kind of thoroughness that made it impossible to quietly unmake later. Clara signed her name at the bottom of the final document, and Arthur Greer stamped it, and it was done. She stood up from the table. Greer looked at her over his spectacles with an expression that had considerably more respect in it than any expression he had previously offered her. "Your father," Greer said, "was a careful man." "He was," Clara said. "This office," Greer said, with the specific discomfort of a man acknowledging something he would have preferred not to have to acknowledge, "should have been paying closer attention to certain transactions in this county over the past several years. I want you to know I understand that." Clara looked at him. "Mr. Greer," she said, "my father understood that institutions only work as well as the people inside them. He kept records because he believed that eventually the right person would be looking." She paused. "You're looking now. That's something." Greer nodded. "Once." They walked out. Nathan held the door. Clara stepped through it, and the cold hit her face, and she stopped on the step and stood there with her eyes closed for a moment. Just a moment. And when she opened them, they were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. She turned and looked at him, and he looked back at her, and the street was going about its ordinary Monday morning business around them. Horses and wagons and voices and the smell of a bakery somewhere down the block. And none of it was grand or cinematic or particularly suited to a moment of significance, but the significance was there regardless. "I need to say something," Clara said. "All right. When I came up that mountain, I told you this was a legal arrangement. I told you that's all it was. I told you I wasn't asking for anything else." She held his eyes. "I meant it when I said it. I want you to know that. I didn't come to your door with some other plan in mind." "I know that," he said. "But something changed," she said. "Somewhere between the burned porridge and Kansas and riding out to Dawson's in the dark. Something changed, and I think you know that it did. And I don't know what that means for the arrangement we agreed to, and I don't want to assume anything about what you—" "Clara," he said. She stopped. "I moved my survey maps off the table," he said. "The day after you arrived. I moved them because you needed the space to work, and I didn't think twice about it, and I've been thinking about that for 5 days. He looked at her steadily. "I don't move things for people. I don't adjust my space. I have spent 7 years making certain that nothing in my life requires adjusting." He paused. "And then you arrived and everything required adjusting, and I didn't mind." She looked at him. "I don't know what that is," he said. "I know what I suspect it is, but I'm not a man who says things he isn't certain of." "That's honest," she said. "It's the only thing I know how to be." "So what are you certain of?" she said. Her voice was careful, but her eyes were not. He thought about it. "I'm certain that I have no desire to go back up that mountain alone," he said. "I'm certain that the cabin feels different than it did 11 days ago, and that I would not describe the difference as unwelcome." He paused. "And I'm certain that the deal we made, the one about this being only a legal arrangement, I'm not sure it's something I want to hold you to." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I wasn't planning on holding you to it either." Something settled between them. Not dramatically. Not with the kind of sweep and gesture that stories often require. Just settled. Like a thing finding its correct level, like water, finding its course, like two people who have been moving toward each other for 10 days, finally stopping moving and acknowledging where they've arrived. "We should get back," Nathan said. "The horses are going to need—" "The horses are fine," Clara said. "They're Wyoming horses." He laughed. It came out of him fully and without reservation, which was so unfamiliar that he was briefly surprised by the sound of it. And Clara looked at him with the expression of someone who has been given an unexpected gift and doesn't quite know where to put it yet. "Come on," she said. "Take me home." And they went. The week that followed was quiet, in the way that weeks are quiet, after significant things, not empty, but settled. The way a landscape settles after a storm has moved through it and left everything in new positions. Clara worked her ranch. Nathan helped because the Whitmore land needed 2 pairs of hands, and he had a second pair, and it seemed straightforward. They fell into a rhythm that neither of them had designed or discussed, which was exactly the kind of rhythm that means something, because planned rhythms last only as long as the plan holds, but the ones that develop on their own tend to be considerably more durable. On Thursday, something unexpected happened. Edna Marsh came to the ranch. She arrived in the mid-morning in her good coat, which was a signal that this was an intentional visit and not an accidental one, and Clara answered the door and looked at her with the expression of a woman who is prepared to be pleasant and is not going to extend herself beyond pleasant without a reason. Edna said, "I owe you an apology." Clara said nothing. "What I said in Ruth's store," Edna said. Her voice had the particular quality of a woman who has rehearsed something and is now discovering that the rehearsed version is harder than she anticipated. "It was unkind. It was small. And I have been—" She stopped. "I've been saying unkind and small things about you for a long time, Clara. Since you were younger than you should have had to deal with it. And I told myself it wasn't that I was just observing, saying what everyone was thinking." She stopped again. "Saying what I was thinking. That was the truth of it." Clara looked at her. "Why are you here, Edna?" she said. "Not cruel, just direct." "Because you walked into that courthouse and did something that 7 men in this valley knew needed to be done and didn't do," Edna said. "And because my nephew is married to Bo Dawson's sister, and Rebecca told her what happened and what she told me about you." She stopped. "I've been wrong about you for 20 years. I would like to say so to your face." Clara stood in the doorway and looked at the woman who had made her childhood and her young womanhood measurably harder, and she felt what? Not warmth. Not yet. But something. "Come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." Edna came in. Nathan made himself scarce with the particular tact of a man who understands when a room belongs to other people. "I went to the barn and worked on a saddle that didn't especially need working on, and he was there for about an hour before Clara appeared in the doorway." "She's gone," Clara said. "How was it?" "Strange." She leaned against the doorframe. "She's not a bad woman. She's a woman who found something to look down on and made a habit of it for so long that she forgot she'd had a choice." She paused. "I don't forgive her everything. I don't think she's expecting me to, but I think she's going to stop." "That's something," Nathan said. "That's something," she agreed. She was quiet for a moment. "Ruth Hadley stopped me on the street this morning," she said. "Asked if I needed anything from the store sent out. Said she'd heard the ranch was going through some changes, and she wanted to be helpful." "What did you say?" "I told her I'd let her know." She paused. "Dr. Patterson, the one who treated Daddy at the end, he tipped his hat to me. Really tipped it. Not the way men tip their hats to women they're dismissing. The actual gesture." She said this last part quietly, like she was still in the process of understanding it. Nathan looked at her. "That's what you did," he said. "When you walked into that courthouse and stood up for people who'd been knocked down quietly for years. You changed the way this town sees itself, not just the way it sees you." She looked at him like she wasn't sure whether to accept that. "People like to believe they live somewhere fair," he said. "When someone proves they don't, it's uncomfortable. And when someone does something that makes fairness possible, it gives people permission to be something better than what they've been." He paused. "You gave this town permission to be better." "I didn't set out to change anything except keeping my ranch," she said. "I know. That's usually how it works." She came and sat down on the old hay bale across from where he was working, and she pulled her coat tighter against the cold and looked at her hands, and he looked at her for a moment before going back to the saddle. "Nathan," she said. Tell me about Kansas." She said it quietly. "Tell me the real version. Not the brief version you told me the other night, the real one." He was quiet for a moment. Then he put down the saddle. He told her. The real version was longer than 12 minutes and contained things he had not said to another living person about a man named Rourke, who had used his position to destroy a family. Nathan had known about a choice Nathan had made that was not legal. And was he still believed correct about the consequences of that choice, and the particular way consequences follow a man, and the reason he had eventually decided that the top of a Wyoming mountain was the place where consequences could not quite keep pace with him? Clara listened to all of it. When he finished, she looked at him for a long time. "You've been punishing yourself," she said. "I've been careful," he said. "You've been punishing yourself," she said again gently, but without any negotiating room in it. "You did something that needed doing, and you've been paying for it every day since. Not because you hurt someone who didn't deserve it, but because you're a man who holds himself to a standard that doesn't leave room for the idea that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing are not the same thing." He looked at her. "I'm not saying you were right," she said. "I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying you're a man who acted out of something real and honest and has been carrying it alone for 11 years because you didn't trust that anyone would see the difference." She held his eyes. "I see the difference." He did not have an answer to that, not one he was ready to speak, but he held her gaze, and she held his, and in the quiet of the barn, with the snow outside, and the horses shifting in their stalls, something that had been braced in Nathan Cole for 11 years, released not completely, not permanently, because some things take longer than a moment, but enough, just enough. "I was going to go back up the mountain," he said. "After this was settled, that was the plan." "I know it was," she said. "It's not the plan anymore." She looked at him. "Is that all right?" he said. And Clara Whitmore, who had been called too big and too stubborn and too much of everything. A woman wasn't supposed to be who had buried her father and climbed a frozen mountain and knocked on a stranger's door and built a case and stood in a courthouse and refused at every possible moment to become smaller. Looked at Nathan Cole with those dark eyes that were exhausted and alive and entirely undefeated, and said very simply, "It's all right, Nathan." He nodded. She stood up. "Come inside," she said. "It's cold and I'm making supper and I burned nothing this time. I want you to know that in advance." He picked up the saddle. "I'll believe it when I eat it," he said. "I am a perfectly competent cook," she said with great dignity. "The porridge of last week would like—" "If you say one more word about that porridge," she said over her shoulder, already walking toward the house, "you are sleeping in the barn with the Wyoming horses." He followed her. The light in the house was warm, and the cold outside was serious, and the snow had stopped and started again in the way it does when it's trying to make up its mind. And Nathan Cole walked across the yard toward the warmth and the woman who had made it. And he thought about the mountain above them, the cabin, the silence, the 11 days of solitude that had been his entire life, and found that it felt for the first time like something that was behind him, rather than something he was returning to. I was not a man given to large statements or dramatic declarations, but he understood with the clarity of a man who has finally stopped arguing with the truth that somewhere between a frozen porch and a courthouse step and a barn full of honest conversation, he had come home. He just hadn't known until Clara Whitmore knocked on his door that home was something he'd been missing. The restitution payments arrived on the 28th day, 2 days before the deadline, which meant Victor Hale had not waited until the last moment. He had paid early deliberately, in the way a man pays when he wants it finished and buried and no longer a topic of conversation. Certified bank drafts delivered by a courier from Cheyenne, who asked no questions and left quickly, as if proximity to the transaction made him uncomfortable. Bo Dawson held his payment in both hands for a long moment before he said anything. Then he said, "It's real." Rebecca took the draft from him, looked at it and said, "Go get the children. Tell them supper's going to be late. We're going to the bank today." Clara was there when it happened. She had been helping Rebecca put up the last of the fall preserves. The two women had fallen into an easy collaboration over the past 3 weeks that had surprised them both, and neither of them questioned. And she watched Bo's face when he held that paper, and understood something she hadn't fully understood before. It wasn't about the money. It was about the proof that it was real. That the thing that had been done to them had been acknowledged and was being answered. That they hadn't imagined it, hadn't been wrong to feel wronged, hadn't been foolish to trust that the truth could eventually be made to matter. She drove home in the late afternoon with that thought sitting quietly in her chest beside everything else she was carrying. Nathan was fixing the north fence when she came back. She could see him from the yard, the particular set of his shoulders when he was working. The way he moved with an economy that came from decades of knowing exactly how much effort any given task required, and giving it precisely that amount, no more. He had been on the Whitmore ranch every day for 3 weeks. He had stopped mentioning the mountain cabin. She had stopped waiting for him to mention it. He looked up when he heard the wagon. Payments came, she called. He set down the post driver. Bows too, all of them, 28th day. He was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. It was the right word, plain and sufficient, and meaning more than it said, which was how Nathan communicated when something mattered to him. She climbed down from the wagon. There's a letter too, she said. From Cheyenne. From the state attorney's office. He came toward her. She held it out. He read it standing in the yard with the November light going flat and gold around them. She watched his face, which was doing the thing it did when he was processing something significant. Very still, very focused. The face of a man who reads carefully because he knows that words have consequences. He looked up. They're opening a formal investigation, he said, into Hale's operations across 3 counties. He paused. They want the ledgers, the originals. They want them in Cheyenne by the end of the month. Clara nodded. She had been expecting this. Morrison had told her 2 weeks ago that the contact in Cheyenne was building something, that Samuel's records were the foundation of a case that was considerably larger than one valley in Wyoming. They'll need a statement from you, Nathan said. In person. I know. It could take days, maybe longer. I know that too. He looked at her. Are you ready for that? She thought about her father's handwriting in those ledgers. She thought about the careful, methodical way he had documented everything. Every conversation, every figure, every moment when something wrong had happened that he couldn't stop but refused to pretend he hadn't seen. He spent 2 years building that case, she said. The least I can do is take it to the people who can finish it. Nathan folded the letter. He handed it back. I'll drive you, he said. Nathan. To Cheyenne, he said. I'll drive you. It's a 2-day trip in good weather, and the weather is not going to be good. He said it with the complete finality of a man who has made a decision and is informing the world of it rather than requesting its permission. I'm not sending you to give testimony in front of a state attorney's office alone. She looked at him. All right, she said. They left on a Wednesday before dawn, with the ledgers wrapped in oilcloth in the back of the wagon, and enough supplies for 3 days, because Nathan planned for contingencies, the way other people breathed automatically, without having to think about it. The road to Cheyenne was long and cold, and occasionally punishing, and they talked for most of it. Not about Hale, or the investigation, or the settlement, all of that had been said. They talked about other things. Small things and large things, in the way that people do when they have decided they are interested in the whole of each other and not just the crisis-shaped portion. He told her about his father's ranch in Colorado. She told him about the summer she was 16 and decided she was going to break the bay stallion, her father said. Couldn't be broken, and spent 6 weeks being thrown into various parts of the same field until the stallion concluded she was too stubborn to be worth the effort. Did you break him? Nathan asked. He's still out in the east pasture, she said. We came to an arrangement. He smiled. He did that more than he used to. She had noticed that. Tell me something you've never told anyone, she said. It was mid-morning, and the road had gone quiet, and it seemed like the right time for the kind of question that requires a road rather than a room. He thought about it for a while, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, I used to want to be a school teacher, he said. She stared at him. When I was about 12, he said with the particular dignity of a man who is committed to something embarrassing. I had a teacher named Mr. Avery who could explain anything. Mathematics, history, literature, in a way that made you feel like the world was larger than you'd thought, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to stand in front of people and make the world larger for them. What happened to that? Life happened, he said simply. My father needed the ranch. Then my father was gone, and there was no one else for the ranch. Then the ranch was gone, and He stopped. Found other ways to occupy myself. She looked at his profile. You still do it, she said. He glanced at her. Do what? Make the world larger for people. She held his eyes for a moment. You did it for me. You did it for Bo and the others when you sat in Dawson's kitchen and explained that afraid men can still be honest men under the right circumstances. You did it for Finch when you gave him a reason to believe his testimony would matter. She paused. Mr. Avery would probably be satisfied with how you turned out. Nathan looked at the road. That might be the kindest thing anyone has said to me in 30 years, he said quietly. She reached over and put her hand briefly on his arm. He didn't move away. They arrived in Cheyenne on Thursday afternoon and went directly to the state attorney's office, where a serious woman named Deputy Attorney Hargrove met them in a conference room and spent 2 hours going through the ledgers with the focused intensity of someone who has been looking for exactly this and is trying not to let her satisfaction show. She asked Clara questions, precise, careful, following the thread of Samuel's documentation, with the certainty of a woman who understood what she was looking at and what it meant. At the end of the 2 hours, Hargrove set down the last ledger and looked at Clara. Your father was an extraordinary man, she said. He was a careful man, Clara said. He believed that if you documented things properly, eventually, the right person would be looking. How was correct, Hargrove said. She looked at the ledgers. We've had information suggesting Hale's operations extended beyond your county for some time. What we didn't have was documentation with this level of specificity. She paused. This is the difference between a case we can suggest and a case we can prove. Clara nodded. Your settlement agreement, Hargrove said carefully, covers the local matter. It doesn't restrict what we do at the state level. I know, Clara said. My father's records don't belong to me. They belong to everyone who was harmed by what they describe. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Nathan, then back at Clara. I'll need you available for additional questions, she said. It may be over the coming months. I'll be available, Clara said. They stayed in Cheyenne that night at a hotel that Nathan paid for without discussion and that Clara thanked him for without argument, and they had supper in the hotel dining room, which was warmer and more formal than any meal they had shared before, with actual tablecloths and an actual waiter who treated them with the impersonal courtesy of a man doing his job in a place where people came and went, and their stories were not his business. Clara ordered the roast chicken, because she always ordered roast chicken in restaurants, a fact about herself she was aware of and had no particular interest in changing. Nathan ordered the same thing because it seemed like the right choice given what she had ordered, and she noticed that and didn't comment on it, but filed it away with the other things she had been quietly filing away over the past 3 weeks. Hargrove is good, Nathan said. Very good, Clara agreed. Daddy would have liked her. She's going to take Hale apart, he said. Properly. At the state level with the kind of thoroughness that makes it difficult to rebuild afterward. That's what he deserves. It's what the families he harmed deserve, Nathan said. In every valley. Clara looked at him across the table. You know, she said, when I climbed that mountain, I thought the best possible outcome was keeping my ranch and surviving the week. And now, my father's records are in the hands of the state attorney's office, and Victor Hale is facing a formal investigation across 3 counties, and Bo Dawson's children have a future that wasn't going to exist 6 weeks ago. She paused. I don't know how to account for the distance between those 2 things. You put one foot in front of the other, Nathan said. And you didn't stop when it got hard. You didn't stop either, she said. He looked at her. I had better reasons than I started with, he said. She held his gaze. Nathan, she said. Clara. I want to say something, and I want you to let me finish before you respond. All right. She set down her fork. She looked at the tablecloth for a moment, then back at him, and he saw in her face the same combination of directness and care that had been there on his porch 6 weeks ago. The face of a woman who has made a decision and is committed to saying it clearly. I know we agreed this was a legal arrangement, she said. And I know you told me in part 4, I mean in the barn last week, that you didn't want to hold me to that anymore. And I told you it was all right." She paused. "But I want to be clear about what I mean when I say that. Because I've spent my entire life with people making assumptions about what I want and what I'm worth and what I should be satisfied with, and I am not. I refused to let that happen inside my own house with my own husband." Nathan was very still. "I mean that I want this to be real," she said. "Not an arrangement, not a legal convenience, not a partnership that we're both too polite to renegotiate." She met his eyes directly. "I want to be your wife, Nathan. Actually your wife. Not because I need protecting, and not because I can't manage alone. I can manage alone. I've been managing alone for years, and we both know it. But because you are the most honest person I have met in my adult life, and because you look at me like I'm worth looking at, and because somewhere between the burned porridge and Cheyenne, I stopped being able to imagine the ranch without you in it." She stopped. "That's what I want. I wanted to say it clearly so there's no confusion about what I'm asking." The dining room went on around them, plates and glasses, and the murmur of other people's conversations, and Nathan Cole sat across from the woman who had knocked on his door in a blizzard with a proposition he hadn't expected, and a situation he hadn't agreed to, and who had, in the course of 6 weeks, quietly, and without making a production of it, become the most important person in his world. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I know," she said. "I don't say things easily. I'm not built for the kind of conversation that—" "Nathan," she said gently, "I'm not asking for poetry. I'm asking for the truth." He looked at her. "The truth," he said slowly, "is that I got on that wagon Wednesday morning at 4 o'clock in the dark and cold, because I was not prepared to let you go to Cheyenne without me, and I told myself it was practical, it was sensible, it was the right thing to do for safety reasons." He paused. "And all of that is true. But the reason underneath all of that is that the thought of you being somewhere I wasn't for 2 days in a city I can't see from the ranch made me feel something I haven't felt since I was young enough that I didn't know how to identify it yet." "What did it feel like?" she asked quietly. "Like I had something to lose," he said. "Like the world had something in it that mattered enough to be afraid of losing." Clara looked at him. Her eyes were bright. "That's enough," she said. "That's more than enough." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that for a moment in the warm dining room of a Cheyenne hotel, with the winter outside and the future somewhere ahead of them, unwritten and large and entirely theirs. "We should get some sleep," he said. "Long drive tomorrow." "Yes," she said. "And when we get back," she said, "we're going to fix the east fence, which has needed fixing for 2 weeks, and you're going to teach me how to read a land survey properly, and I'm going to teach you how to make biscuits that don't taste like regret." "My biscuits are fine," he said. "Your biscuits," she said, "are a cry for help." He laughed again fully, without reservation, the way he had been laughing more often since the morning in the general store, when Edna Marsh had said something dismissive, and he had discovered with some surprise that he was angry about it. They drove home on Friday. The weather held barely reluctantly in the way Wyoming weather holds when it has somewhere more important to be, and they arrived at the ranch in the early evening with the last light going orange and cold over the mountains and the horses in the pasture moving toward the fence when they heard the wagon, because horses remember who feeds them and harbor no pretense about it. Clara stood in the yard for a moment after she climbed down. She looked at the ranch, the house, the barn, the fence line, the land her father had worked, and her grandfather before him, and her great-grandmother before that. The land that 6 weeks ago had been 12 days from being lost forever. She looked at it the way you look at something when you've nearly lost it, and then kept it with a quality of attention that has weight to it, that understands value in the particular way that only proximity to loss can teach. Nathan came to stand beside her. "You all right?" he said. "I'm all right," she said. "I'm better than all right." "Then why are you standing in the yard in the cold looking at the barn?" "Because it's mine," she said simply. "Because I almost lost it and I didn't, and I want to look at it for a minute and know that it's real." He stood beside her. He understood that completely. After a moment she said, "Will you go get your things from the mountain?" He looked at her. Your cabin, she said. Whatever you want to keep from it. I think you should go get it. She paused. And I think you should close the door when you leave. He was quiet. You don't have to, she said. If you want to keep it. No, he said. You're right. He looked at the mountains above them, where his cabin sat in its 7 years of careful solitude, and he thought about it with the particular clear-eyed recognition of a man who is no longer pretending about something. I'll go up on Monday. Do you want company? He thought about it. Yes, he said. I think I do. They went up on Monday, as he'd said. They rode the 5 miles in the cold morning, and Clara looked at his cabin with the expression of a woman taking in something important, and he showed her the survey maps and the coffee cup and the chair by the fire, and all the things that had been his entire world for 7 years, and she was quiet and respectful about it, in the way she was quiet and respectful about things that mattered. He took what he wanted to keep. It wasn't much. A few books. His father's watch. The land maps because they were useful. The chair because it was good quality, and the ranch needed chairs. He closed the door. He did not look back at it. They rode down the mountain in the late morning, with his belongings in the saddlebags and the cold air on their faces, and the valley spread out below them, and when they reached the Whitmore ranch yard and dismounted, Nathan Cole understood something with the finality of a man who has arrived somewhere he intends to stay. He was home. The investigation into Victor Hale proceeded through the winter and into the spring with the slow grinding thoroughness of a legal process that is being done correctly. 3 more counties were implicated. 7 additional families came forward with documentation. Deputy Attorney Hargrove built her case with the same methodical care that Samuel Whitmore had used to document it, and when the formal charges were filed in March, they were the kind of charges that did not leave room for negotiation. Hale's new lawyer, his third, told him to accept the plea. He accepted the plea. The day the news came from Cheyenne, Clara was in the kitchen, making something that was not burning, and Nathan was reading one of the books he'd brought down from the mountain, and the writer who brought the letter found them in that ordinary domestic piece, and handed over the envelope, and left without knowing he was delivering the last piece of something that had started on a frozen porch in November. Clara read the letter. She set it down on the table. Nathan looked at her face. It's done, she said. Her voice was quiet and complete. He set down his book. It's done, he said. She looked up at him, and he looked at her, and between them was everything that had happened since a November night when she had pounded on his door with both fists and said 4 words that had changed both their lives completely. Between them was the burned porridge, and the reorganized shelves, and the midnight coffee, and the ride to Cheyenne, and the hotel dining room, and the mountain cabin with its door closed for the last time. Between them was Samuel's handwriting in careful ledger columns, and Bo Dawson holding a bank draft in both hands, and Robert Finch with his head bowed in a cold line cabin finally putting something down. Between them was a marriage that had started as a transaction and become without either of them quite deciding it should the truest thing in both their lives. Your father would be proud, Nathan said. Clara nodded. Her eyes were bright. He'd be smug about it, she said. He'd say he knew it would work out. He always said that even when he had no reason to. Maybe he had reasons you didn't know about, Nathan said. She smiled. Maybe he did. Spring came to Wyoming. The way it always did. Slowly then, all at once, with the particular quality of arrival that felt like a promise being kept after a long winter of wondering whether it would be. The ranch came back to life in stages first. The ground softening, then the pasture greening, then the horses moving differently in the field, with the looser, more expansive movement of animals that remember what warmth is. Clara planted the kitchen garden she had been planning all winter. Nathan fixed the east fence properly this time, and then the west fence, and then the gate that had been hanging slightly wrong for 2 years and driving Clara quietly insane. Bo Dawson came over in April to help rebuild the barn roof and brought his eldest boy, and the 3 of them worked 2 days on it, while Rebecca and Clara sat on the porch in the almost warm spring air and talked the way women talk when they have stopped performing for each other and are simply in each other's company. He's different, Rebecca said, watching Nathan on the barn roof. Yes, Clara said. I mean, you're different too, Rebecca said. Both of you. But him especially. She paused. He smiles now. He smiled before, Clara said. Not like that, Rebecca said. Not the way people smile when they're not thinking about whether they should. Clara looked at Nathan on the roof, moving carefully along the ridge beam, with the competence and ease of a man entirely at home in his body and his world. And she thought about the man who had opened a mountain cabin door 11 days into 11 days of silence, and looked at her with those dark eyes that saw everything and said very little. And she thought about the distance between that man and this one, not in character, which had always been the same, but in something harder to name. Something about the difference between a man enduring his life and a man inhabiting it. He's home, she said. That's all. Rebecca looked at her. So are you, she said. Clara smiled. So am I, she said. The years that followed were not without difficulty, because a ranch in Wyoming in the 1880s did not traffic in easy years, and Nathan and Clara were not the kind of people who expected the world to accommodate them. There were hard winters and dry summers, and prices that fell at the wrong time, and fences that came down in storms, and the ordinary grinding work of keeping something alive that required constant tending. They had arguments, real ones with genuine stakes, because they were both stubborn people with strong opinions, and the particular forthrightness that comes from having learned early that silence costs more than speaking. They argued about the north pasture and the breeding stock, and once memorably about whether the kitchen needed a new stove, which escalated into a conversation about something else entirely, and resolved itself in a way that neither of them found it necessary to report to anyone. They built something, not just the ranch though. The ranch became something real and solid, and the best managed property in the county, which people commented on regularly, and which Clara accepted with the matter-of-fact satisfaction of a woman who had always known exactly what the land could do if someone worked it correctly. They built something between them that had the particular durability of things that are made slowly under pressure by two people who are paying attention to what they're making. The valley changed around them, not overnight, not completely, but in the incremental, genuine way that things change when something that was wrong gets named and addressed, and the people who were harmed by it get to watch the accounting happen. New families came into the county, good families, steady families, because the word in 3 surrounding counties was that the valley was fair, now that the land could be trusted, that a woman named Clara Cole had stood up in a courthouse and made it so. People told that story. They would be telling it for years. And Clara herself, the woman. The town had spent 20 years calling unwanted, too big, too much, too difficult, became the person people came to when things went wrong, because she had proven in the most direct way available that she understood what wrong looked like and was not afraid to say so. Women came to her kitchen with problems. Men came to the fence line with questions. Young people came because they had heard the story and wanted to know what it felt like to do the thing that needed doing when everyone expected you to do something smaller. She always told them the same thing. You don't do it because it's easy, she said. You do it because it's right, and you find out those aren't the same thing in the middle of it when it's too late to stop. On a Tuesday evening in late October, exactly 1 year from the night she had pounded on a mountain cabin door with both fists, Nathan was sitting at the table with the land maps. He still consulted more than strictly necessary, and Clara was doing the thing she sometimes did in the evenings, where she stood at the kitchen window and looked at the land, and Nathan looked up from the maps and watched her for a moment. "What are you thinking?" he said. She turned. "I'm thinking about my father," she said. "About the fact that he spent 2 years building a case he didn't live to see resolved." She paused. "I used to feel sad about that. I still do, but I've been thinking lately that he knew. I think he knew he wouldn't be the one to finish it. I think he kept those records anyway because he believed someone would be. Because he believed in me even if he didn't say it that way." Nathan looked at her. "He told me once," she said quietly, "that the bravest thing a person can do isn't facing something dangerous. It's facing something dangerous when the people around you have decided you're not capable of it." She held Nathan's eyes. "I think about that a lot," she said. "It's true," Nathan said. "He was talking about me," she said. "I think he was preparing me. I just didn't know for what." Nathan stood up. He crossed the room. He stood in front of her, and he was not a man who made speeches or grand declarations, never had been, and she knew that, and did not need him to be, because she had learned that the language Nathan Cole used when things mattered most was simple and direct, and said exactly what it meant. "Clara," he said. "Nathan," she said. "Your father was right about you." She looked at him. "You were capable of it," he said. "All of it. Every bit of it." He was right. Her eyes filled. She did not look away. "So were you," she said. He put his arms around her, and she put her face against his shoulder, and they stood in the kitchen of the Whitmore Ranch, her father's ranch, their ranch with the October dark outside and the lamp burning warm inside, and it was quiet in the way that things are quiet when they are exactly as they should be. There was nothing more that needed to be said. The woman everyone had called unwanted had built a life so full that the word no longer had a place to stand in it. And the man who had gone up a mountain to be alone had discovered in the most unexpected way possible that the only thing stronger than a man who survives alone is a man who is finally completely and without reservation brave enough to let someone stand beside him. That was the truth of it. That was all of it. And it was more than enough.